On September 13th, 1991, Freddy bites the big one. They've saved the best for last. Freddy's Dead, the final nightmare. Rated R. Starts Friday at a theater near you.
Freddy's Dead.
Hello, listeners past, present, and future. This is Haddonfield Radio, where, as always, we bring you the history, legacy, and lore of movies, trailers, and more. This season on Haddonfield Radio, we will be taking you through a fan commentary, deep dive exploration of every single film in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, featuring everybody's favorite, hilariously ham-fisted dream demon, Freddy Krueger. We are your hosts. I'm Christian White.
And I'm Joe Francazio.
And on an otherwise beautiful, sunny and breezy September morning in Los Angeles, California, all the way back in September 1991, the film production and distribution company New Line Cinema and its maverick CEO, Robert Shaye, held a mock funeral for the character of Freddy Krueger at Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Los Angeles in order to cleverly promote the sixth film in the Nightmare series, Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, which was scheduled to open on screens across the country that very weekend. Stars from the iconic Nightmare on Elm Street series such as Alice Cooper, Leslie Dean, Sean Greenblatt, Breckin Meyer, and Lisa Zane all attended the clever, tongue-in-cheek solemnities, a successful publicity stunt which was ultimately covered hungrily by numerous media outlets worldwide. Former New Line Cinema producer Rachel Talalay, who by 1991 had been promoted to the job of directing the series' sixth film, Freddy's Dead, was among those present at the funeral and watched on with a tearful mixture of acknowledgement and pride. Talalay, born to intellectual and urbane parents hailing from Chicago, who both worked as scientists and raised their children in the affluent neighborhoods of upscale Baltimore, where daughter Rachel had excelled throughout her studious upbringing, having emerged from a childhood of painful shyness to both graduate from the prestigious film studies program at Yale University, while also running its highly vaulted Yale Film Society. By the late 80s, Talalay had steadily built a reputation in the film business as a dependable jack-of-all-trades, having started her career working alongside director John Waters on films like Hairspray and Crybaby. Talalay was then hired by Robert Shaye to join New Line Cinema, working her way from a production assistant on the original Nightmare and its sequel to a producer for the third and fourth films, and finally, after a short respite away from the production of Nightmare 5, as the director of the sixth Elm Street outing. Talalay and Nightmare 5 producer and now Nightmare 6's screenwriter Michael DeLuca injected a high degree of funhouse artifice to the screenplay for Freddy's Dead, and specifically dialed the camp up to 11, with Freddy Krueger played again, this time at the absolute highest volume possible, by a sturdy Robert Englund. Talalay and DeLuca even convinced the normally frugal Robert Shaye to pony up for an expensive 3D climax that required an additionally painstaking workload for an already overworked special effects team, that was planned to, hopefully, up the mainstream appeal of what had been universally marketed as Freddy's Final Nightmare. Meanwhile, on Valentine's Day 1991, another movie, shot on a modest budget of $19 million by an essentially untested director, with little fanfare and no real previously bankable stars, was quietly released into American multiplexes and almost instantly cemented itself across the cultural zeitgeist as one of the most frightening films of all time. This movie, immediately hailed by critics and recognized as a brilliantly directed genre masterpiece, was also a certifiable blockbuster that reaped nearly $300 million in global box office, while sweeping nearly every category at that year's Academy Awards. The film also importantly reintroduced worldwide audiences to a central character who suddenly found himself with the most pop cultural appeal since, well, Freddy Krueger. However, this character was drawn from the dark inspiration of writer Thomas Harris, whose own obsession with serial criminal pathology gave birth to a character whose exploits were based on real-life monsters far scarier than anything Freddy, Jason, or even Michael Myers had mustered in years. The film was Jonathan Demme's brilliant The Silence of the Lambs, and the character, played to iconic perfection in a career-defining performance by actor Sir Anthony Hopkins, was, of course, Dr. Hannibal Lecter. And Silence of the Lambs reaped all of this success while steadfastly refusing to even categorize itself as a horror movie in the first place. After a decade of explosive growth, by 1991, it seemed that the horror genre had become something of an outlier. With a few bright exceptions by the early years of 20th century America's final decade, attention had begun to move away from the big screen and back towards the small screen. A series of innovative new TV shows like Law & Order, Northern Exposure, Oz, and The Sopranos had begun to carve out their niche, securing very healthy ratings for programming that started to feel much more alive and fresh than anything at the movie theater. And there was one very peculiar, very dark, and very addictive new show that had become true appointment television, building a legion of rabidly dedicated fans who would speculate on and dissect every frame of each mind-bending episode. The show, while even at its most absurd or untenable, was anchored by an inarguably brilliant hook. Who killed Laura Palmer? The show was Twin Peaks, and it had taken pop culture and its famously insular creator, director David Lynch, by storm. And one of those Twin Peaks fans, absolutely glued to each riveting episode, was Rachel Talalay, who found herself creatively renewed by Twin Peaks' originality and vision, and sought to bring those vital elements to her own upcoming project, Freddy's Dead. Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, made for a budget of $10 million and released in September of 1991, opened to a stellar $14 million weekend, and ultimately earned $35 million around the world, which was a marked improvement over A Nightmare 5, but far from the heights of previous sequels. Finally, on September 12, 1991, a day before the U.S. release of Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare, L.A. Mayor Tom Bradley immortalized the character of Freddy by declaring that day Freddy Krueger Day. Little did Mayor Bradley know something that scores of die-hard horror fans already knew: that it would take a lot more than a little thing like death to keep a good slasher down. Joe, here we are, 19 episodes in to Haddonfield Radio, otherwise known as Season 2, Episode 6, and I have to ask you the question that everyone listening is waiting for the answer to, and that is, what do you generally think about Rachel Talalay's 1991 film, Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare.
Womp, womp, womp. Yeah, I don't know. It's rough, but I want to stop you for a second because that last line you said was really good, and I gotta say you labored over the last line of your whole intro, and it was the best line of the whole thing. I liked it. It keeps a lot more than death.
Yeah, well, I think
that was good.
Anyone outside of L.A. Mayor Tom Bradley would probably have known. Clearly, Freddy isn't going to stay dead for long, especially if the movie was going to be a box office success. That all the pre-release hype for this film and the incredibly creative marketing that I was talking about in the introduction that Robert Shea kind of orchestrated, this mock funeral for the character of Freddy. Yeah. Well, that distinctly improved the box office results, especially of that opening weekend for Freddy's Dead.
Yeah, it's kind of a funny aspect of this whole thing. I think that, they make part 5, it doesn't perform the way they want. And so they go, well, let's make one more and kill them off. And it's like, okay. It's weird to think that if the last one didn't do well, that why would you actually do another one? Especially when you kind of kill the character at the end of every movie. But they obviously Freddy. This is the house that Freddy built. They wanted to give him a big send off that he deserved.
I think nobody I'm sure nobody wanted that series or that character to go out on a low note.
But then it's even funnier, I think, that they released this movie, and although it gets kind of panned hard by the critics, it still makes enough money that Shea kind of goes, maybe there is a little life left in this, and they go to Craven and like, what do you think? Can we do something else with it? So it's kind of like the idea of even to them of if them really trying to kill off their character, they just can't do it. They're never willing to actually walk away from it. As long as there's some money there, they keep milking it.
I tend to think that is exactly the truth. I tend to believe, and this is just my own conjecture, that I don't think Robert Shea had any consideration of this actually being the swan song for the character of Freddy Krueger.
I think if it was like a flop, then it might have been it. It really, but the thing is, it made money. I mean, I think they did go into it with the intention of like, this is it. There was a lot of interviews with Rachel Talalay where she was kind of being very definitive about, this is it. No more Freddy. We are done. So I do think that was their intention.
Well, I think that's the way...
money talks.
In a relative sense, that's definitely the way that I would have sold this movie. That this is going to be, as an audience, this is your last chance to go to the movie theater and celebrate this horror character that has become super iconic, that has penetrated the worldwide pop culture, and has, as like we've talked about in previous episodes, has actually sort of eclipsed the franchise that he's even anchoring.
And this is coming out in a time when the idea of like doing a lot of reboots of classic things wasn't really happening. So, to them this was really probably it. And it's funny to think of like, with Halloween Ends, how that was another franchise kind of trying to kill off a character, but yet you didn't ever really feel like they were truly killing them off, because we know that these franchises will always continue to try to put out material these days, and that's different from back then. It's a different effect on the audience. The audience for Freddy's Dead probably went in really thinking
that this was the end. This
was going to be the last time we're going to see Freddy.
Well, I think it's actually a fairly interesting parallel that you bring up Halloween Ends, which of course premiere decades later from the perspective of Freddy's Dead. But in terms of the franchises, I always look at Halloween Ends in my mind as sort of the end of the original run of Michael Myers films.
Well, yes.
And I think of Freddy's Dead even looking at it from a 2024 perspective, where we know what came after Freddy's Dead.
Yeah.
I still think of Freddy's Dead as the end of the original run of Freddy films. As we were talking about before we started recording, make no mistake about it, Freddy does die in this movie.
Yeah.
Because the Freddy that you see in Wes Craven's New Nightmare, the next film, the 7th film, theoretically is not Freddy Krueger. It is a demon taking on the guise of Freddy Krueger. So, for all intents and purposes, this really was the death of the original version of the character. Do you see what I'm saying?
Right. Now, forgive me, though, with Freddy versus Jason, it's been a while since I've seen it. What version where does that Freddy
I feel
fit
like
into?
Freddy versus Jason, to me, is what, like, in the world of, like, comic books, is what they would almost call, like, an Elseworlds film. So, in other words, in my opinion, and maybe you guys out there might know something different than I do, or might have a different perspective, and if you do, leave it in the comments. But what I'm going to say is, what was I just saying, though? I lost my train of thought.
Freddy versus Jason.
In Freddy versus Jason, I think that you're looking at an Elseworlds version of Freddy that is separate from the canonical events of the first 6 films. I feel like in that film, it's almost like a different Jason and a different Freddy than the Jason and the Freddy that existed within their own franchises. Even though from the perspective of Freddy vs. Jason, Robert Englund still plays Freddy, and Ken Kersinger comes in to play Jason for the first time.
Are they existing in the real world, or is this them like battling in hell? I honestly
it's sort
can't
of a
remember.
mixture, but
Yeah.
I just personally feel like I don't think that's the same exact
Right.
Freddy. It's almost like a multiversal version of Freddy.
Okay, so that was my next point. I truly believe that just like Halloween and stuff, that the Nightmare on Elm Street series has proven that it's a multiverse.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
well, that or you have to chalk up some things to some really bad continuity and writing and stuff that, you know. But think about, like, so the TV series has their first episode where they give Freddy's sort of backstory,
And it's a slightly
it's
different.
different than what they give us in Freddy's Dead, and that came first. So they kind of go into Freddy's Dead saying, "Oh, I'm going to."
The episode of the TV series Freddy's Nightmares, you're saying the origin is distinctly different for Freddy.
Yes.
So that is a good point, because it does lend me to think the same thing, that perhaps that is also an Elseworlds version of Freddy.
And then like you bring up New Nightmare, like there's all these. It's like there's spin-offs, or like it's a multiverse. I mean,
I think spin-off is actually a great word to describe Freddy vs. Jason. I think Freddy versus Jason is, in fact, basically like a spin-off of those two franchises. That's almost like a one-off spin-off.
Right.
That just takes those two characters, places them in a platform where they can interact with each other. But I believe that it is completely exclusive of the events that took place in any of the two characters'
sort of.
previous films.
I mean, you have to. You don't have to, but it would help to know the history a little bit with the way they play with each other's minds, or I should say Freddy does.
You know how the characters of Freddy and Jason work.
And you need to know about Jason's mom, because Freddy does the, and yada yada. So,
but I think you're right. In terms of Freddy's Nightmares, the TV series, and that Freddy, the Freddy that you see in Freddy vs. Jason, the Freddy that you see in the Platinum Dunes Nightmare on Elm Street remake. You could actually look at, under these auspices, a consideration of a multiverse, you could look at it the same way. That's just another multiversal timeline of Freddy's history.
Yeah.
Wherein in the
it plays out even differently.
In the 2010 is different there as well. So I think you're right. I think you actually can look at the Nightmare franchise in a from a multiversal standpoint. Maybe not to the degree of the Halloween franchise.
No, but you would have to say there's like the TV series timeline, then there's like the main movie series timeline, and then you got your spin-offs like New Nightmare and Freddy vs. Jason, and
The other thing is, for Freddy's Dead, I think that Robert Shea did something really beneficial, which was give a little bit of breathing room between Nightmare 5 and Freddy's Dead.
Yeah.
Where Nightmare 3, 4, and 5 were like I talked about last episode, they were like coming out of a factory.
But unfortunately, it didn't result in a good movie, which
you're
always
absolutely right.
We're kind of that was the critique of them rushing. You kind of go, oh, if they'd taken more time, they would have made a better movie. Well, here they are. They've taken their time. They've given them a decent budget, and
So wait, what was the budget on this one?
$10 million.
10 million, yeah. So that's they had still a modest amount of money to make a horror film with practical effects set pieces to the extent that the Nightmare films always have, $10 million, you're going to be stretching that very thin.
Yeah.
Still.
Yeah.
But
well,
what I would say
with the 3D stuff, you have to remember.
Exactly.
So this was, even though this is sort of the 90s, and we're like getting to the end of movies kind of coming out in 3D. They weren't just sort of using the standard way 3D movies had been made. They were pushing the envelope. They were doing new things with it. Unfortunately, a lot of it didn't work, but a lot of the work they did do was groundbreaking in terms of 3D effects that were going to start to come out in the park rides, theme park rides.
Okay,
so
wow, all right.
Think about when she goes into Freddy's head in this movie. Right? It's like this, the camera's literally twisting and turning. It's very much like the 80s, late 80s, or early...
Like Star Tours.
Star Tours, Back to the Future.
You're absolutely right.
Especially. It's that sort of
like
feel,
a motion
right?
Odyssey movie ride.
Right. Like you
feel like you're on.
And you're going through...
Oh my God,
right?
You're absolutely right.
So that's why they spent a decent amount of money with that tech. It's probably also why the whole movie wasn't done in 3D. And it slowed things down. It made it very hard because they weren't doing the standard thing. They were actually pushing the envelope. It just unfortunately didn't really result in them benefiting with anything like added to the movie that helped it.
When I was thinking about the application of the 3D technology for the climax of this film, I was thinking about how, for Freddy's Dead, one thing that really stands out in the fan community during the month that I've been researching and reading comment threads and Reddit posts about this film, and something I always see mentioned is sort of like this fan distaste for the campiness of this film. But I would argue that in order to support the weight of a kind of funhouse 3D climax, I think to have had a dark, horrific tone for the first 85% of the film that sort of devolves into this kind of like I talked about in the intro, this funhouse style 3D sequence, I think it would have felt even more out of place. I think the only way to balance that 3D sequence at the end would be to dial up the kind of the outrageousness of the rest of the film. Now, while I do think Rachel Talalay brings some interesting energy to this film as a filmmaker and as a director, and Michael DeLuca as well as a screenwriter, I just think ultimately the film does get completely bogged down with these cheap kind of laughs,
I was gonna say,
and campy humor.
I agree with what you...
At the loss of scares.
Yeah, I would agree with what you're saying, how the comedy helps sell the 3D. I would have preferred no 3D in a scarier movie.
I 100% agree with you. But I will say, remembering back to when I was at the age where this film came out, and I remember the sheer excitement and curiosity about the 3D sequence that was going to be, and getting the 3D glasses handed to you at the beginning when you're in the line for the film. I have to admit, I remember that being very exciting. But I also remember being extremely let down by the actual 3D moments in the film.
Do you remember if you thought going into it that the whole movie was 3D, or were they very clear somehow ahead of time?
I think with those original red and blue 3D glasses, the problem that used to always arise was that if you had audiences wearing those glasses for a prolonged period of time, for a lot of people it would create discomfort or headaches or disorientation. And I think I read in my research, when they were testing out exactly how much 3D to apply to this film, I think anything more than like 10 to 12 minutes, and people naturally started pulling the glasses off their face.
Yeah, the whole when to put them on thing was a really weird thing.
It takes you right out of the movie.
And so there's some stuff I was reading that was almost suggesting that the 3D stuff was not planned from the beginning, and they decided to go that route as they were starting to put together a work cut and see footage, and they realized, ooh, we gotta give the ending a punch. What can we do to punch it up?
If you shoot something specifically, even at that during that period of filmmaking in the 80s and 90s, if you were to shoot something you would have to shoot it in the production sequence of the film. You'd have to shoot it thinking about the fact that you're creating something for 3D.
Right. So
the idea of converting something to 3D after is not only expensive, it's a tedious process.
No.
And doesn't have a high success rate.
No.
So
no, it was definitely something, but this movie doesn't have the budget to be 3D the whole way through either. So they knew it was just going to be a limited thing, and it's weird. So when basically in the movie, way at the end, when you see the main character, Maggie, she puts on these 3D glasses before entering Freddy's sort of head, and then they sort of dissolve away with that nice. I kind of admit I love that Nightmare on Elm Street little animated twinkle that they've added over the years.
I agree.
Right. So that was your cue to put them on. And I guess some people, it wasn't always very clear, because earlier she also has them, and so I think some people thought you were supposed to put them on there, but it's not till she kind of does that very obvious sort of, I'm putting them on. Now, what's interesting is if you go online, and there's a work print cut of this movie that's sort of famous amongst fans.
I love that you always dig out these alternate cuts or scripts. I was actually curious. I was going to ask you during the course of the fan commentary if there were alternate cuts of this film.
Oh, there's so much.
It seems like a film that would have had multiple cuts.
Exactly. Because all right, so let me start.
Yeah,
so,
go ahead.
So with the 3D thing it's great because there's an alternate take of that point where she puts on the glasses. But she literally, in this alternate take, looks directly into the camera and says, now, and then puts them on. And it's even weirder than the way it is. In the movie, she doesn't say anything. She just puts them on.
In that idea's support, I would play devil's advocate and make the argument that the Freddy franchise has had a history and has in its DNA this metatextuality. We've talked about
she's breaking the wall.
But by addressing the audience to put on the glasses is most definitely breaking that wall.
No, it is. I'm saying that doesn't bug me. It's just comes off very cheesy. The way
100%.
The way she's just like, now, But yes, the work print has a lot of scenes that were cut. And it is, this movie, as it goes on, there's certain elements of it that just sort of come out of nowhere that you kind of feel like, I feel like there was more to this, like when Maggie's mom sort of shows up just towards the end when she goes to question her, but like up until that point you almost got the feeling that, I don't know, like we had just found out her father died recently, or we're finding out adoptive father and all that. But there was this whole beginning scene with her mom that was totally cut, and you get a lot more backstory about, her life with the new family.
Well, one of my criticisms of this film, and you saying that, it really jumps into my mind, is this film has almost like this weird, distinct lack of proper exposition.
Right, so there's a huge thing. There's this, Maggie all of a sudden in the movie, she just starts remembering sort of the Freddy stuff, as her dad. But in the cut scene, there's a very clear link between her grieving because her what she believes as her real dad, but it's her adoptive dad, has just died in her life. And through this grieving, it sort of triggers the memories because she thinks she's remembering stuff about her dad.
Yes.
And that's why also they kind of, when they slowly divvy out the scenes of Robert Englund as her dad, where at first you just see his legs and arms.
Right.
Obviously, it's gonna, it's him. But so it's weird that they cut a lot of this exposition stuff. There's a lot more stuff with John Doe that kind of fills in some little bits.
Sean Greenblatt's character.
Yes,
right.
Exactly.
Yep.
And now, so that's a whole other thing. You're talking about alternate cuts and other scripts. So the movie, before we get to this script, they started on a version where they were going to kind of pick up right kind of from the part 5 characters, where the movie was going to focus on Alice again and her son Jacob, who was going to be older. He was going to be like 15, and I guess so. Alice would be like in her 30s, and what's going on is, in this version, she was actually going to be fighting Freddy again, but she is aided by the Dream Warriors.
Oh, geez.
And they were going to bring back all
Wait, the Dream Warrior characters from 3? From Nightmare 3?
Taryn, Joey, and Kincaid were going to come back, and they were going to be known as the Dream Police. Wait a minute. Gets better. Taryn was the Blade Cop. Joey was the Sound Cop. And Kincaid was the Power Cop.
Oh, I will say I would have loved to see Kincaid again. And and I'm sure he would have loved to be in this film. But oh my God.
But what happened was they started having problems with the actress who played Alice. They couldn't get her back. And then Rachel Talalay just hated the idea.
I mean, I would imagine why. Yeah, it's ridiculous. And then, even for a Nightmare sequel, it's ridiculous.
This is also the point where Peter Jackson is brought into New Line.
I love this anecdote. And I want to just say real quick, going back in my own personal history, I've mentioned in our Evil Dead trailer park episode, one of my favorite directors of my youth, and to this day, but when I was a younger person heading into film school, my touchstone director was Sam Raimi. And there was another director at that time, all the way on the other side of the world, that was like another Sam Raimi who I loved, and that was Peter Jackson. Yeah. And in his early days, of course, Peter Jackson, who we all now know from creating the Lord of the Rings franchise, he had made a series of extremely well-respected, quirky, over-the-top, violent horror films like Bad Taste, Dead Alive, Meet the Feebles. And before he was known as this blockbuster director, this is Peter Jackson, of course, he came in, like a million other writers and directors during the 80s and 90s, to pitch Robert Shea an idea for Nightmare 6. And why don't you give them an idea of what that was? Yeah,
they brought him in and his writing partner, who I am blanking on the guy's name.
We'll put it in the pinned comment. We'll find it.
But they actually worked in the New Line offices, and that's how he kind of got his relationship, Peter Jackson, with Bob Shea. So really, Freddy's Dead is a direct, or I should say, Lord of the Rings is a direct result of Freddy's Dead, the production of Freddy's Dead.
Well, Lord of the Rings truly is a direct result of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, because all the capital that came into New Line Cinema through the Freddy franchise was what was spent on producing the 3 Lord of the Rings films, and then which were shot back to back to back.
Yep, and the whole reason they know Peter is because of this.
Exactly, exactly. There would never have been a Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings were it not for this meeting, I would argue, and I'm sure Joe would too, where Peter Jackson came in and he tried to sell this pitch that Joe and I both really like.
He was working in the offices. He wrote the script there at New Line.
So they were hiring him to develop this pitch.
Because he's not an American.
He's from New Zealand.
And him and his writing partner came and literally worked at the New Line offices. They wrote a script. I believe it was called Dream Lover.
Nightmare on Elm Street, Dream Lover.
And it was the idea is again a little bit of time.
Which is a great title. Yeah, goes right along with the other movies.
Truthfully, I love this idea.
I do too. I do too.
So the idea in this world is that Freddy is weakened. Some time has gone by, and the kids of Elm Street, the new generation, they all purposely take like sleeping pills and drugs, and they have these dream parties, and then they purposely go in and basically mess with Freddy and kick his butt.
And Freddy's like this decrepit old homeless man, like he has no strength, no energy, and they just go in and I was saying to Joe in another conversation, it's similar to that legendary story about the Maasai African warriors, where the Maasai teenagers, in order to have a right of manhood and enter manhood, they have to sneak up on a lion and slap the lion, and that's how they are judged allowed to become a man. And in this film idea for Nightmare 6 by Peter Jackson and his partner was very similar. The teenagers would go into the dream world to taunt Freddy.
And then Freddy, sort of by chance and sort of accidentally, is able to kill one of them. And he gets a little bit of juice
back.
Just
enough juice.
Right. And it starts the whole thing again. And then there's also a secondary character, and I don't know exactly how this plays out. There's a policeman who is in a coma. So he is permanently stuck
in Freddy's world. Oh, what a great idea that is.
I'm a little unclear
I love that.
I think, I'm not sure about this part, that he purposely has been put into this coma to stay there and battle
like
Freddy.
To be like the, I think it was...
Or to
he's
guard
the guard.
Exactly.
To be the permanent guard. He has taken on this
mantle
to guard Freddy and keep him in the dream world.
Make sure the kids don't,
and you know, in every single way, it's such a clever inversion of the tropes and themes of the first movie. Instead of the teenagers taking no-dos so they don't fall asleep in the first movie, now the teenagers are taking sleeping pills to go in and find Freddy. So I think that would have been such an excitingly interesting film.
I don't know what the ultimate result is if you know, obviously they're hiring people to write a script that will kill Freddy off. So I don't know in that story exactly how it plays out or if they even got to that point.
Well, something tells me that is probably why Peter Jackson's pitch didn't end up becoming Nightmare 6.
Yeah, it's not
because
Freddy-centric.
They probably realized that ultimately the goal was to lop off the franchise at this point, at least for the time being.
And truthfully, you know, I don't know at what point Rachel Talalay gets hired, you know, as director, and clearly her goal was not to kind of go in that. You know, she talks about purposely trying to get away from that darker gothic look that they had in Part 5.
Which is really the only thing about Part 5 that I really liked. Was that kind of dark stylization that was used to kind of bring the fifth film more tonally in line with the earlier Nightmare films.
Rachel Talalay is a great producer. I love her work there. She has gone on to become a really good director, especially within TV. She directed a lot of the new Doctor Who stuff, which she's really become known for.
Some of the episodes of the newer incarnation, basically Doctor Who, you have the older years, and then at the point where Christopher Eccleston took over, that kind of started a brand new era of Doctor Who. And amongst those modern Doctor Who episodes, a few of the ones that are considered the very best episodes were directed by Rachel Talalay. She also, of course, we were talking before we started recording, she went on in, I think, 93 to direct Tank Girl for New Line Cinema, adaptation of the quirky comic book. And she went on to direct a film, I think in 95, that I also remember seeing in the movie theater called Ghost in the Machine with Karen Allen.
Was her. Yep.
And you look, Rachel Talalay was really an unbelievable, creative, brilliant person who was, like I said in the intro, really was like the right-hand man to Robert Shaye and the jack of all trades, and someone who could get anything done. She even had special effects technology in her background.
Yeah, she was like a computer whiz, and so she was always able to help push what they could do on their budgets special effect wise, because she kind of had the mind for that type of technical stuff. And
as far as Rachel Talalay is concerned, it's interesting to me that she also served that same right-hand man a position for, of course, John Waters, the cult director.
So she wasn't around. Well, let me back up for a second. My ultimate point was, you know, although I don't think her choices were the best for this movie, she did accomplish what she wanted to make, and she made it what she wanted to make well. I just don't agree with her choices. You know what I'm saying? Like, she made her film well.
Well, the tone of Freddy's Dead was...
the tone is... Yeah, exactly. It's all off.
Was very... But it was purposefully applied by Michael DeLuca and Rachel Talalay. This campy funhouse tone was something they were going for.
It's just the direction was not...
I talked about Twin Peaks in my introduction.
Well, yes, she was heavily influenced by that.
Well, everyone became completely blown away and influenced. And although it was a cult show, it wasn't like a top 10 ratings bonanza show. But the fan base Twin Peaks had was so fervent and so dedicated that basically Rachel Talalay and Michael DeLuca, and I'm sure by transitive Robert Shaye, they wanted to tap into that a little bit and bring some of those eccentric elements that made Twin Peaks so memorable and try to apply it. So it's like I can see the decision-making that became Freddy's Dead. Like you said, for me, ultimately, it's still close to the bottom of the barrel for the franchise. I don't think it's as bad as Nightmare 5. Why I put it above Nightmare 5 is my respect for Rachel Talalay, and also I think that there's some visual imagination in this film that's at least interestingly staged.
This is my like guilty pleasure Nightmare. You know?
I think this film has a lot of laughs.
Yeah,
and yes, earlier I complained about the laughs because they're at the behest of the scares.
Yeah.
And yes, but if that's the film we're getting, I will have to admit there are some funny parts of this film, and parts of this film that even this month rewatching the film was really making me laugh.
Yeah.
And I do find a lot of this film to be marginally entertaining. And another positive, I think Lisa Zane, the actor that is the co-lead of this film, I think is
Billy
great.
Zane.
I think she brings back this gravitas and brings back some a memorable performance. She's in a long line of great women performances in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, whether it be Patricia Arquette, Heather Langenkamp, Lisa Wilcox. She's in that tradition.
Yeah.
And I think she does a very serviceable job with what she has to work with as an actor.
Yep.
I have absolutely no complaints. I like her look. I like her connection to Freddy as a character. I like the storyline. But the film it never rises. You know, it just never rises.
See, to me, I think it was a really wise thing. If they were going to go in this direction, I think it was really wise for them to not actually title it A Nightmare on Elm Street 6. You know, Freddy's Dead.
They thought of calling it A Nightmare on Elm Street 6, The Final Nightmare.
Right.
And they just thought it wasn't
She wanted to separate
enough.
it a little bit. You
right.
know, and I think that's good, because I do.
Yes, I do.
I
too.
almost feel like it is separate from, you know, those first 5 are so sort of connected. Kind of one can jump to the other, And
it's like we said in the last episode, 3, 4, and 5 of the Nightmare franchise are essentially like an informal trilogy.
Yeah.
So this was definitely meant to be separate from the first 5, and yet,
well, you know,
it continues the continuum is there, but
we leave, you know, Springwood, Freddy, I think one of the main mantras of this movie is that and he says it, there's a Springwood in every town.
That's very true.
And they're getting Freddy. They've figured out a way to get him out of Springwood in this movie, and so the whole thing has a different tone, feel, look. You know, the comedy, the title, and I think that's sort of good for if they were going to go in that direction, because it can kind of exist almost. Again, like as an offshoot, as a spin-off.
What do you think of Robert Englund in this movie? Honestly.
No. Robert Englund is always great. I don't like, you know, what I don't like is just what they wrote for Freddy at times. You know, he's always able to portray Freddy wonderfully. The fact that they do give him a lot of comedy, of course, you know, yeah, I do like it. I do enjoy. That's what I mean, guilty pleasure. I do enjoy seeing Freddy being really funny.
Yeah,
you know,
well,
great
like
graphics
you were just saying,
and all that stuff is great. But it also it's so far removed from the original, and I almost feel like to end this, they should have gone the opposite. They kind of should have gone right back to a real creepy, messed up Freddy.
And tie it back to the first one. I think also they should have maybe boosted another $5 million into the budget. Just to give it a little bit more of an edge, a little bit more of a competitive edge in terms of its production, saying to themselves, hey, this is our swan song. We've made all this money off both this character, the merchandising, the movies themselves. It was a box office bonanza. Relative to the horror genre of that time, these Freddy films made New Line Cinema a lot of money. Comparative to where they were before Freddy as a company, they certainly were on another level after Freddy.
Well, a big part of them deciding to kill off Freddy was they had other projects.
That's a very, very important
and they had some
context.
I think even in the same year, didn't Drop Dead Fred come out?
It could have been the same year. And they also had the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
That's right.
New Line Cinema was trying to turn into a franchise. And I believe there was even one more big series they were developing. And so Robert Shea's attention, and he admits this.
Yeah, it was time to move on to other stuff.
Was moving away from Freddy. Not to mention the slasher genre, well, like I mentioned in the intro, while it had this explosive growth throughout the 80s, had even the big diehard fans like myself, Joe, like all of us listening to this podcast, we can all agree that by the early 90s, we can all agree, honestly, the slasher genre had clearly lost its steam.
Yeah, it was.
And that's from we're doing the show because we love movies like this, but we can all agree that something had lost its
Even when I look at the list of like all the other like horror movies that came out this year, there's not a lot of I mean,
No.
well, now the other thing to mention is the same year as Wes Craven had a movie coming out, People Under the Stairs.
Wes Craven was literally kicking out a movie a year throughout the 80s and early 90s.
Yeah.
He was like the hardest working director in horror, in my opinion. And The People Under the Stairs ends up being such a fascinating release, such a unique and artistic, bizarre and eccentric. Actually, the irony is everything Freddy's Dead wanted to be, People Under the Stairs was. It was a legitimately eccentric and strange, tonally bizarre film, yet it was very Wes Craven, and it was full of social satire and subtext. So it's just so funny to me that here you have Wes Craven arguably always sort of chasing Freddy, and yet creating some of these projects alongside and parallel to the Nightmare franchise that were very fascinating and almost tangentially sort of communicating with the ideas of the Freddy films.
Yeah.
Whether it was Mitch Pileggi's character, Horace Pinker in Shocker, or The People Under the Stairs. Wes Craven was trying and stretching out and trying all these new and exciting ideas. Whether they were successful or not, okay, but he was trying, he was doing things. But I really do think it's an irony to me that a lot of similarity in tone exists between People Under the Stairs and Freddy's Dead.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep. It was a big year of sequels in terms of horror.
Well, let me throw a few out there, because it was all sequels. We had Child's Play 3, Ghoulies 3, The Omen 4, Puppet Master 2, and Puppet Master 3 in 1991. We had Scanners 2, Waxwork 2, Trancers 2, Silent Night, Deadly Night 5. Are you following me here?
Critters 3.
There you go. In also 1991, I mentioned Silence of the Lambs in the intro. There were a few films that were what I call horror adjacent. I think by the early 90s, studio had started to feel that the horror genre had sort of lost its steam and lost its way and started to feel almost like a stink. And that's why Silence of the Lambs, to any discernible movie fan, anyone who says Silence of the Lambs is a horror film is not wrong. And yet, the filmmakers behind Silence of the Lambs did everything in their power in their marketing to distance themselves from that moniker.
But, you know,
there were others like it, like Sleeping with the Enemy, the Julia Roberts film, which essentially was a horror film that was now called a thriller.
All these newer films, it's not monsters and not like made up monsters anymore. They're all the bad guys are quote unquote real life.
Yeah, that was a big thing.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
People seem to want less of the extreme Freddy, Jason Michaels, and
another hugely iconic horror sequel that at the time of its release was looked at as basically the worst film ever made, but now is considered a beloved film, is Troll 2.
Yeah.
Came out that year. There's another one.
Yeah.
Another one, you know what? I saw this one in the movie theater, and I still adore this movie, even though it was lambasted when it was released. I think it actually was called the worst film of 1991, but we went to the movie theater and saw it, and we loved it. And it was that movie Nothing But Trouble with Dan Aykroyd, Chevy Chase, Demi Moore, John Candy, and it's again, horror adjacent, almost like a horror comedy, directed by Dan Aykroyd.
He has the prosthetic, he's the big guy, right?
Like
yeah.
Each actor plays like 3 or 4 different characters.
I remember it now.
And one of them, Dan Aykroyd, plays this old man who has a big dick for a nose.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you remember this now?
Yeah, exactly. That's what was popping
And Chevy
in my head.
Chase and Demi Moore
I went with the
play
word
this.
prosthetic. You went with dick, but okay.
Yeah, there you go. They played this like wealthy couple who end up getting lost in this weird town called Valkenvania, which was the original title of the film.
Yeah.
And this movie was like Dan Aykroyd's bizarre, coked-out vision.
It was in the vein of the Transylvania 65000 thing. And
It was like
and
the-
those.
Yeah, one of those early...
the haunted house. There was another. God, I can't think of it.
Well,
but
the
there's
thing
something
is-
else where they have to stay in. There's ghosts and it's a castle. Or,
By the early 90s, Dan Aykroyd and Chevy Chase, they could get anything bankrolled.
oh God, yes.
If they came up with a film that they were going to appear in together, the studio was just greenlight it. They didn't even need to see a pitch. And this
Spies
was
like us.
like a real swing for the fences by director, writer, and star Dan Aykroyd.
Yeah.
And for 99.9% of the population, it was like a movie you walk out
really
on
bad.
in the first 20 minutes. But to this day, I love this movie. I loved it when I saw it. It's a bizarre, exciting, exuberant, strange movie. If you have not seen Nothing But Trouble, I'm going to put it as my recommendation of the episode. When we're done with this podcast and you're done listening, go find Nothing But Trouble and check it out. And thank
so
me
bad
later.
it's good.
That's exactly right. So that was another one. We also had another horror-adjacent film, one of my favorite series from that era, Ernest Scared Stupid.
Oh my God.
Remember Ernest? Ernest
Yeah.
Jim Varney,
Oh, yeah.
this incredibly bizarre, strange comedian who parlayed this character he created for stand-up, Ernest, into this series of pretty wildly successful movies.
Hey,
and
Vern!
And each film would kind of have a different tone. Well, this one was the spooky one. It was Ernest Scared Stupid, and it, of course, played fast and loose with all the tropes of the 10 years of horror that came before it. And it's actually, I love the Ernest movies. I mean, they're guilty pleasure, but I love Jim Varney. There was another movie I had never heard of until my research, and it has one of the most interesting titles I've ever heard. Are you ready? Came out in 1991. It was called Night of the Day of the Dawn of the Son of the Bride of the Return of the Terror. And it was basically, they took George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, they wiped all the audio off of it, and made brand new dialogue and audio for it.
Really?
Now, ever since I've heard of this movie during my research, I've been trying to find a copy of it. George Romero's Night of the Living Dead is so in my heart. It is in my psyche as a human being. And George Romero is a very important figure to me in my life, one of not just my favorite filmmakers of all time, but just someone I have just tremendous respect for in life and had a chance to get to know. And one of the happiest moments of my life was being with George. And I'm dying to see it. It reminds me in its conceptual idea to that movie Kung Pao, I think it's called, where they basically took an old kung fu film and they made brand new audio and dialogue and made it into a comedy. So I'm trying to find this film. Have any of you guys listening to this, have any of you ever seen this bizarre film? If you have, let us know in the comments and let us know what you thought of it. Because to me, it sounds like crack. Like, I need to smoke that now. Okay? It's probably awful, which is why I've never heard of it or seen it, but I'm going to find this bizarre film. But anyway,
I'll be driving Christian to rehab after the episode, folks.
I think what we should be doing... Oh, can I just say one more positive thing about Freddy's Dead? I want to throw one more positive thing just to balance the board a little bit. One of the other things about this film that I think is a marked improvement over the last few films, or at least the last two Nightmare films, is the score by Brian May. I think this score is...
Not Queen's Brian May, by the way.
And I had to Google it to make sure.
Yeah.
Because Queen's Brian May actually has done some movie music.
Yes.
But this Brian May actually has his own sort of iconic background in that he scored the Mad Max movies. And I actually think his score for Freddy's Dead is one of the better scores of the franchise.
He's not afraid to bring back the classic theme, which is, you know, you need it, especially if you think you're making the last one. And yeah, it just, I think of the last few, the scores have been a little more forgettable.
This one at least has a jaunty kind of energy, and I like the, like you said, the reclamation of some of the Nightmare themes.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it works, and it's just something, as I was watching the film to get ready for the episode, something that stuck into my head that I did feel positive about. And look, we say this a lot on Haddonfield Radio when we get into like the nitty-gritty of some of these lesser films in the franchises we cover. Look, even if Joe and I are constructively being critical about some of the elements of Freddy's Dead, we love all of these films. We wouldn't be doing this series if we didn't love all these films. Each one of these films has a place in our hearts, just like yours. But objectively, you guys know just as well as we do, every franchise has its high points and its low points. That's just natural. And while I'm sure there are fans out there, and like my dad has this saying, there's an ass for every seat, right? And I'm sure there's people out there that this is their favorite Nightmare on Elm Street film. Maybe this was the first film they saw in the series, and therefore they have a nostalgic connection to it. So we're not trying to diminish if there's people listening right now that love this movie. When we get to the fan commentary, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of things Joe and I talk about loving about this film.
Yeah.
We're just simply trying to point out the positives and the negatives, give you guys an overview of our perspective of basically all things Freddy's Dead.
Well, it would be, poor of us to not bring up certain things
it would
that
be
are obvious
intellectually
about
dishonest,
the movie.
right?
You know what I mean? And let's face it, also too, as filmmakers at this point, they've all. The machine is running smooth and stuff, and so yeah, their movies look good. They're always well made. Everything, the camera work and the cinematography and the acting and all that stuff is sort of they're all on par with each other. It's easy to not talk about that stuff at this point because it's sort of just they've got it down. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're exactly right.
And it's
And like Joe said earlier, the point he made earlier that I think it just really sums things up, that even though this film obviously has its detractors and obviously has its faults, and you can see some of the seams, I will argue to my grave that this is a very entertaining film to watch and a fun film to watch in terms of the context of thinking about the whole franchise, the history of the franchise, and the history of the period that this movie was released within. The beginning of the 90s was such a sea change for horror, and what would come in the 90s was so different yet so informed by what had come in the 80s. So the decade was just getting started and feeling itself out. So believe me, there's a lot of stuff we love about this film and a lot of stuff that maybe not so much. But we're going to go through it anyway and enjoy ourselves and talk about it. All the good and all the bad.
Yeah.
So with that said, before we jump into the movie, because I know you guys are all here to watch Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare with us, I just want to say, like I always do at this point, if you're taking time out of your busy schedule and your busy life to listen to Joe and I, two ding-dongs in Rhode Island, yapping about the sixth film in a horror franchise, then I want you to know from the bottom of both my cockily heart and Joe's, I want you to know that we love you, we appreciate you, and that is from the most sincere place. We sincerely appreciate you taking time to support our creativity here at Haddonfield Radio. Every time we come down in this basement, every time we get in front of these mics, we picture you guys here with us. We are reaching out directly to you. We do these episodes simply to open up a conversation with other fans out there. So if you have something that we missed, that we got wrong, that you want to add to the conversation, please let us know in the comments. We read and try to reply to every single comment. We absolutely do read every single comment. And Joe and I love collecting information about these movies. So if you have something you want to add, please let us know. And when you do that, do us a favor and let us know where you're listening from, because we love to find that out.
Yeah, I have to admit, our last episode of the Trailer Park, where we covered Rob Zombie's Halloween films, I totally had a brain fart, and I was talking about how Michael's base age was 10.
Oh, we got that so wrong.
And
we did make that
I
mistake.
steered you wrong. You were right. You were talking about him being like 5 or 6, and so I guess he was 6 in the originals. And so yeah, I mean, and once we had one of our listeners point that out. I'm like,
oh, we've had.
Of course, yes, of course. But sometimes I don't know. I'm thinking on the fly.
Joe and I are never offended if you want to challenge something we said or add to something, or if we get something wrong. We are never offended by being corrected. And we are absolutely never offended by any constructive criticism about Haddonfield Radio in general. We're doing this show for you guys, to entertain you guys. If there's something we can be doing better, let us know. We will take that under consideration.
we should point out too, like, we don't edit this. So once, you know, so like if we mess up, it just is what it is. It is what it is, and we just kind of keep going, or sometimes we don't realize it, you know, once we record, and afterwards we do. Well, you know, it's what we talked about, and I hope, you know, we've proven ourselves to you guys at this point that, you know, we have done our research and stuff, but we are talking and absorbing a lot of information for these movies.
Yeah, so sometimes it's easy to get things
wires
boggled
crossed,
up.
Yeah,
it is.
But anyway, thank you guys. We really do appreciate it.
Yeah,
Please hit the subscribe button and like all our stuff. Please, it helps us a lot, believe it or not.
We will never ask you for $1 or to go visit a Patreon page or any of that. We are not interested in that. Joe and I both have careers and jobs that pay our bills. We do this out of the love of the game, and the only thing we would ever ask you, if you haven't done it already, like Joe just mentioned, if you could just please hit that subscribe button, only so we can keep in touch with you and let you know when new episodes of both Haddonfield Radio and the Haddonfield Radio Trailer Park are going to premiere. So with that said, we're going to jump into the movie. We're going to be watching, of course, 1991's Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, directed by Rachel Talalay. We're going to be watching it right now, the 6th film in the Friday the 13th. The 6th film in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. I'm getting ahead of myself there.
A little
hint there for maybe what's to come. Not that any of you are going to be shocked by season 3. But anyway, we're going to check out Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. We'll watch it together. We'll talk about every kind of aspect of the film. So anything else you want to add?
No, let's do it.
All right, let's jump right in.
Okay, and here we go. Freddy's Dead.
I can't believe we're already at the 6th Nightmare on Elm Street film.
I know,
How did we already get to 6?
It's crazy how quick reviewing like one big movie a month makes time actually seem like it's going by.
Oh my God, time goes by so fast doing this show. I want to say something real quick. For the rest of this fan commentary, I would actually like to be referred to as Oprah, what is it? Oh, Oprah Noodle Mantra.
Of course, that was Johnny Depp's credit for his cameo
Noodle
in this.
Mantra.
Hey, but how cool is it that they added the Freddy Krueger
It's
quote,
actually one of my favorite parts of the whole movie.
It's very clever, I'll give them that.
Because the Freddy films have used those quotes at the beginning, or biblical quotes.
Yeah.
And so to now actually quote Freddy is just so cool.
It's even like right after a nice long Nietzsche quote.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
It's really good.
And you're like taking that in and being like, yeah, man. And all of a sudden they give you the Freddy thing, and it's great.
Yeah. I have to say, it is great. It is fun.
Now, this is one of the weirdest parts of this whole movie for me. What the hell is this? What is this computer? Who is presenting this information? You know what I mean? It's so...
It's like, do they think
out of nowhere?
Do they think they need to catch fans up with what they're watching?
They do. I think.
And why that?
I honestly think they didn't have a clever way of giving that exposition in any other way. But also the fact that it says.
But do you need that exposition at the beginning of the 6th film in this series? Who do they think is coming to see these films?
I think they just really want you to know some time has gone by.
Right.
And that's why Springwood is so very different at this point, you know?
Right.
It's devoid of children and so weird. It's just, and the fact that they say 10 years from now, you know, it doesn't make any sense. There's a lot of time problems with this movie by them trying to set up that this is 10 years from, I don't know, now, which you have to assume is them saying 1991.
Right.
Right? But
so
in terms of like ages of people and even Maggie being 28, it just it's weird stuff.
But wait, so in the reality of the movie, they're in the year what, like almost 2000 or something?
I guess.
Wow, that's
Isn't that what they're saying?
So 10 years from now.
And it's 1991.
I hadn't really thought of it until this moment. Yeah, what does that mean? So they must be, oh my God, September 11th is about to happen for these people.
Oh, boy. And so, you know, back to the Roger Waters, or John Waters. John Waters.
Pink Floyd, Roger Waters.
Man. No, so John Waters, you know, Rachel Talalay came over from the Crybaby movie, which is why she wasn't a part of Nightmare 5.
Also with Johnny Depp.
Right. And Divine was supposed to play that woman right there.
That would have been the woman that gets thrown out of the top of the plane.
But Divine passed away before they filmed the movie. So also a lot of the crew.
And don't you think, in a way, that right off the bat, wouldn't that have signaled to the audience, you're going to be in for a more campier tone?
Yeah, I mean,
because Divine is, of course, such a cult icon.
And it was part of the idea that they wanted this to have a ton of cameos, kind of like that
well, of course.
John Waters
but
thing.
Boy, would that have I actually feel like including Divine in that tiny cameo would have actually started the film off with this more of a balance in that you know what to expect in a way.
Yeah.
Or you're getting a good hint as to what you're going to expect tonally.
Yeah.
It's too bad that Divine passed away.
And a lot of the crew on this movie came from Crybaby. Like Rachel just brought them over with her. So you can totally see the influence all around.
I think the earlier John Waters films were actually distributed by New Line Cinema.
I mean, why not?
Because
Rachel,
I know that
Rachel was a part of them. Or
there was one of his early films that even before any of these films or Nightmare films were made, that Robert Shea used to like drive around with the reels in the trunk of his car, delivering them to midnight movies and midnight screenings. So it's that connection to John Waters. This is an iconic moment from this film. The Wizard of Oz homage.
Yeah.
Freddy as the Wicked Witch of the West.
This whole thing, the house.
It's actually one of the few sequences from this film that you see come up in a lot of like the best of the franchise moments.
And you know, they're giving you that little bit of little taste of Freddy because it's a little while I think before we see him again. You know.
Can I just make a little quick side tangent here right off the bat? You know, something I never like in movies, to a lesser degree in television, but certainly in movies, is I don't like the credits during the opening of the movie, where you're seeing this, like you're seeing the actors' names or who is the production designer. It's not that I don't have a respect or a consideration for who those people are. Believe me, I literally have like an encyclopedic collection of all these names in my head. So I do respect these people, but I don't like seeing it over the action of the film. So not just in this film, but really in any film.
You'll notice that he crashed on the house next to Nancy's house. 1427 was the number where he landed.
Oh, that's a nice little detail.
And then he sees it, and there's a bigger.
Like, listen to the music.
I know
the way that the situation is being depicted.
It's cartoony. Even the way he starts rolling. If you look, I mean, you can tell the guy is forcing the roll sort of on himself at certain points.
And there are moments in this film that are literally lifted directly from like Looney Tunes cartoons.
Oh yeah, that's what they when he's pushing the bed of spikes out and all that stuff.
I mean, you could make the argument that certainly from Nightmare 3 on, I mean, a good parallel character in fiction that you could actually compare to Freddy Krueger in a weird way is Coyote.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of interesting to me.
That he keeps dying and coming back.
Yeah, and that the winking and nodding to the audience.
Sure.
It's kind of funny to me that Freddy is sort of cartoonish. And even in his darkest form, in the first Nightmare, when his arms go long, that's kind of got a cartoonishness to it.
Even this thing here, like it's like there's a sheet, like a screen there that he's gonna break through. That's very cartoon.
Right. And here's Robert Shea.
There's Robert Shea.
Robert Shea, of course, playing the ticket taker, and he's wearing Freddy's glove.
Yes. Yep. And so, you know, there's a few interesting things about this character of John Doe, right? I feel like there's.
Why do you think they went with John Doe?
Well, he has amnesia, right?
Right. So he just
and the idea is that he is what's Freddy is using to get himself out of Springwood, right? He is the last.
So Freddy is
survivor.
Manipulating.
He's the last kid of Elm Street.
Right. Got it.
But he happens to have this amnesia, which I say has got to be Freddy influence, because it's what's going to get this kid out here.
I like that Rachel Talalay utilizes some of the kind of editorial mechanisms from the previous films. Like when you are subjected from the real world and thrown into Freddy's world,
look, the effect so cartoon. Look at that cutout.
But yet but it still it looks related to the way it was depicted in other films, other Nightmare films.
And listen to what he says here, like.
Now
See, I think this is all Freddy's plan. I mean, obviously, it's to send him, push this kid out. He knows that he doesn't remember anything, and it's probably...
It's just like the way Freddy sometimes pretends or play acts that he's being hurt in order to continue to manipulate an event within the dream world. It's the same type of thing. At the end of the day, yes, Freddy is puppeteering the events in that.
So, it's weird, though. So this kid, he has amnesia. He only remembers select things. Obviously, a big part of this movie is the bait and switch, where they're setting you up to really believe that this kid is Freddy's kid, even though if you do the math, it doesn't make sense. And then, of course, we find out that Maggie is Freddy's child. But I think it's interesting that they never actually resolved anything around John Doe. You know, he goes on this adventure, and you kind of figure you're going to get... I mean, all you figure out is, yes, he came from Springwood.
Right. But you would assume that you're going to get
something, and he just dies still as John Doe, a name, something.
This big piece of canonical information is going to to be attached to the character.
It's just there as sort of a bait and switch. Now,
it feels like, but it ends up feeling like a missed opportunity.
Something that I like to believe, and I'm not saying this is a common thought. I have seen people talk about it, though, is that idea that originally the script that they were going to go with was going to revolve around a 15-year-old Jacob, the kid.
Right.
So you could...
Which was Alice's son.
Alice's son.
Right.
And this kid, is arguably about 15 years old, John Doe. And I think it kind of makes sense that could be Jacob. You know what I mean? That's why Freddy has this connection to be able to manipulate this kid, and it would make sense that he could kind of be the last kid of that age of Elm Street if he came from Alice's or Alice. But I'm not saying it makes sense, but in my head, I just don't like that unresolved John Doe thing. So in my head, he's sort of Jacob.
And even more importantly, it should be noted that it's pretty amazing that Breckenmeyer can have a bowl cut and a ponytail at the exact same time? Who else? This is a look that should have been popularized through this film.
Yeah.
The bowl cut ponytail combo?
Yeah.
Now that, I hope, comes back into fashion.
Did you ever have one? Did you go for that look?
Well, I'm a teenager in the 90s, so I had plenty of bowl cuts. I was like the king of bowl cuts. And we all had bowl cuts back then. But none of us had bowl cuts and ponytails.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I think, not only do I think Lisa Zane is a charismatic performer who I wish had a bigger career. If she didn't have that much, maybe that was her own choice too, very well, possibly. But I think she's a very charismatic performer. I like the energy she brings to this film, and I like her look. Of course, like you mentioned, she's the sister of a Titanic actor and the Phantom actor, Billy Zane, and one of the most memed actors, really, Billy Zane. And I think she's great in this, and I kind of wonder, I have to wonder why she didn't have a bigger career going forward.
I don't know, honestly. Now, we should point out that the actor here, who is playing Carlos, Ricky Dean Logan, he was actually cast as John Doe, the lead originally. And then as he kept reading the script, he basically went to them and said, I actually really I'm identifying with this Carlos character. Can I have that?
Yeah.
And they did. And then they recast it with the actor who did play John Doe, which I'm going to have to look, Sean Greenblatt.
Yep.
So lucky for him, this guy decided he wanted to play Carlos.
The thing I will say about Freddy's Dead, and it's occurring to me now watching it right now, the teen Elm Street kid characters in this entry, I think, are a marked improvement from some of the last couple entries. I actually think that I like the 90s-ish of all these characters. Like, I like enjoying these looks and remembering being in the 90s and wearing some of these clothes. Again, I didn't ever get to the heights of Breckenmeyer's look, but I like seeing it in front of me here.
This girl Tracy, this character Tracy, is a little too much like Taryn for me.
3D glasses were just hanging on that sculpture. Anyway,
you know what I mean?
Saying?
That the Tracy character here is comes off a lot to me like Taryn in
Nightmare
Dream
3.
Warriors.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I think also the characters right there in that scene to me look like, was it from Nightmare 2 that had the karate character, the Karate Kid character?
Yeah, yeah.
I feel like maybe that was I was thinking that was sort of a callback to that dynamic.
Yeah.
And so it sort of makes sense that maybe that other character is meant sort of to evoke Taron from Nightmare 3.
And in a way, also in this movie, all the teenagers, like, because they're in this, this was this like a halfway house type of a thing,
right?
And so and they're all like, the trauma's pretty heavy in their heads. It's all parental abuse, pretty much. You know what I mean? And that's a little different than how. The Dream Warriors, they had trauma, but in a different way. You
Real
know
quick,
what I mean?
see the snakes that she's seeing on the poster?
Of course.
Of course, the dream snakes end up in the 3D climax. And I will bring up a comparison, something that I think the dream snakes always remind me of from pop culture. We'll get there.
This is where they try to give you some real concrete reasons to why Freddy is
well, this is one of the few sequences that has
and
appropriate amount of exposition.
Yeah.
And I think this film actually needed more exposition than it gets. So I actually welcome scenes like that are giving you a little bit of a kind of like
it is
connective tissue into the themes.
It's a little too specific. You know what I mean? That he's basically describing.
Well,
Freddy.
I think that's subject to. It's just not the best screenwriting.
Yeah, I know.
But the information is interesting. I'm saying.
No, they're definitely telling you sort of why and how he's able to keep coming back is through the power of these dream demons that are inhabiting him.
I swear this is like the second or third time I've seen reference to the word cocaine in these shots.
Well, there's a big thing going on because they think this kid's doing drugs,
right.
And obviously he's in a place where
like
they're getting kids off of drugs if they have a drug problem, and so they were definitely, I think, subconsciously trying to have this.
Look, I got to say something
here. Don't do drugs message here.
For all of those people who don't like the constructive criticism elements of Haddonfield Radio, you might want to block your ears. But if you really watch this scene, you can really kind of get an understanding of why poor Sean Greenblatt didn't have much more of an exciting career after this. I will have to say some of his acting in this movie, it leaves a little bit to be desired. And if Mr. Sean Greenblatt is listening to this, I mean, of course, that comes from a place of love, but I will say, as you know, when he was just stomping around and slamming the chair up and down.
Well, they don't give his character much else to do besides
it's probably not
be
his fault.
Frustrated out of not knowing why he's staying awake for days and all this stuff. And,
everyone in this movie looks like kids you would see at the mall in 1991. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Like, I swear I went to high school with half of this cast.
And it's, talking about this actor.
Sepultura Reigns, I believe, is what it says behind him, written on the wall. Now, I wonder if that's Sepultura, the band. Did Sepultura exist in 1991?
There's a lot of sort of pop music in the credits. Like, there was all these songs for this movie that came out on a soundtrack that was not score, orchestral. So maybe that could be one of them. And then, of course, this is where we're getting our sort of first taste of maybe Freddy. It's kind of obvious that it's Freddy as her dad, and there's this whole thing in like I say in the work print where they cut out a scene of Maggie's dad dying that really ties this whole thing together that I think was a mistake for them to cut out.
We've noted in previous Nightmare sequels this history of these deleted or excised sequences or scenes that when you bring them up during the episode, we both always say, now why would you have cut that and kept some of this other stuff? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like that actually would have furthered the narrative a little bit.
It does.
Or it would have tightened it a little bit.
Maybe it kind of, once you actually stick it in there, it might slow things down a little bit because, all that exposition is pretty early on in the film. So maybe they needed to get to things a little quicker, and it's just, that's the place where they could cut it.
I kind of like bringing out some of these, again, more of these classic Elm Street tropes, the interior of the house, the Freddy children.
Okay, so you ready for something kind of controversial?
Yeah, let's call it a controversial fun fact.
Okay, you're right. So, with this movie and the visits to the quote unquote dream house, there are a lot of people who believe that this movie confirms the fact that Nancy's house was in fact Fred Krueger's house. When we see these flashbacks to when, you know, Maggie was young and Fred Krueger was her dad, and when the mom finds the room in the basement and all that. So because there's many points where she starts out in these like sequences of you start out in a different house, and then it's sort of that she's remembering as hers, and then slowly you realize you're in. And then you kind of go back and you talk about all the times the little girls that you always see jump roping would reference, this is his house, this is Freddy's house. There's some people that have pointed out.
Which we noticed in either the last movie or the fourth movie.
Right.
Remember, we talked about that, actually.
Yep. And then I guess and I haven't researched this part, but I think there's in the later movies, there's a bunch of times in the dream world when you see that house where the numbers are actually gone. So you could theoretically say, you don't know. It could. So there's this other train of thought where people are saying that they really try to like explain all this, where they say it's two different houses, but they do look the same because basically they were all built in the 50s in Springwood, and back then a lot of the houses in neighborhoods were all built kind of identical, and that's why you might see it on the outside in the dream world looking like Nancy's, but they're actually seeing Freddy's because it just looks similar. Now this is all stemming from what we're seeing in this movie, because it kind of blurs the line between that house, where they start out walking around the decrepit, what looks like Nancy's house, but then you end up in like Freddy's torture room. And there's even a cut scene where you see more of the daughter finding that room, or where they're following the little girl in a dream sequence. It's not even in like a flashback. I think it's in a dream. And she's, again, you're starting out in the decrepit house, but you're ending up in the 50s basement of Freddy's house.
Oh, wow.
You know what I mean?
It's on par with when you sort of knocked the top of my head off in the Nightmare 1 episode when you suggested that the entire film had been a dream.
No, I don't.
Well, that's another. This one is a great. Kind of like a thought puzzle.
Yeah. I don't know if there's any sort of definitive answer. I don't know when they were making this movie.
I'm going to have to go to those
thought.
like the Redditor boards and see if there's any way to search that concept.
I believe, and I'll try to put the link, but I think it's just on like Nightmare and Elm Street Films.com, and I think there's a whole section about this because there are people who have written essays.
Oh, of course.
I mean, they've really tried to break it down and give you all the evidence for both ways. And again, that's what I mean. Like, I think there's stuff that can suggest either way, and I don't know if the filmmakers ever did anything to make you really be able to tell at the end of the day if that's what was supposed to be going on or not.
So it's not like a situation where fans are retroactively applying lore based on just production design infrequencies.
No, I think they are. I think this is coming more from the fans. I think the filmmakers were just doing cool things in this movie where you're kind of going from the decrepit house to that.
Yeah, so the fans are tying these.
They want to fill in the blanks like we've talked about in the past. Like, why are they calling it Freddy's house? Right? So that kind of gives you the seed for this whole idea.
I think it's a really interesting chain of thoughts.
Yeah.
In trying to think through it like you were doing, I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
I also like this. They actually bring in the Carney motif to the film, and I keep bringing up that I've used this term like 15 times so far this episode, but this funhouse stylization of Freddy's Dead. And I like you actually are getting that motif here in the movie itself.
I think I saw an interview with Rachel where she talked about specifically this scene is like she wanted the Twin Peaks vibe, but with the John Waters look.
Well, this is exactly what it is.
Right? Like this stuff, that's John Waters mixed with Twin Peaks perfectly. The old guy just sitting there in a circle, but in a funhouse, And of course, we're about to
And yet it's also very Lynchian.
Well,
I would.
No, Twin Peaks. Yeah.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean,
Oh,
it
you're
is.
saying Twin Peaks,
That was
right?
both.
Right.
That's what I mean. It's
yeah,
both.
yeah.
You've got the weird Twin Peaks vibe of an old guy in the setting.
Yeah.
But the setting, the way it looks in the funhouse, it's John Waters. I mean, it could be both.
The problem
clearly
is, let me say this.
But she's not David Lynch. You know what I mean?
That is what I was going to say. And then we'll get to Roseanne.
Yeah.
The problem is David Lynch movies feel Lynchian because David Lynch's artistry. When you try to emulate something that David Lynch does and create something that feels like David Lynch, it's always going to feel and reside in artifice.
He's just making his movies. If you can't go and say, I'm going to make a David Lynch thing. You could say this is an homage, and yeah, it's never going to be the same, but I don't know if
I will be
adds or detracts.
I am eternally befuddled in my life to this day. We're in 2024 right now recording this, and I continue to be eternally befuddled by how Tom Arnold happened. How did Tom Arnold get to this point?
So one weird thing though in this scene, the girl who's playing Tracy, it takes me out of it because I feel like the whole time you can sense that she's trying not to laugh. She's got this like lip biting thing.
Yep.
Now I do want to point out though really quick with the Tom and Roseanne thing, there was a cut scene here where you see Tom Arnold come up to John Doe. And he remembers him. So we're getting that confirmation that John Doe is from Springwood. He runs up to him and says, you were supposed to leave. You weren't supposed to bring more of them back with you. And so they remember him.
Right.
And obviously they kind of kicked him out. Because
here's something I do think is really cool. This statue that says, "The children shall endure."
Yeah.
Very, very cool. And I just want to say something real quick.
Yeah.
Bringing Roseanne in, especially at that point in 1991, the
huge.
literal zenith of her popularity through her sitcom Roseanne, bringing her in and Tom Arnold together, who also by that time, in a parallel sense, had sort of conquered the pop cultural zeitgeist as really the power couple of the early 90s, as strange as that sounds. And yet they are very eccentric people. So bringing them in does give the film, again, more of that kitschy appeal. And certainly Rachel Talalay must have thought going forward it would have even a cultier appeal.
I think I read that they approached them. I think this was that point, Nightmare was huge.
Roseanne approached
I think a lot of stars wanted in on this, especially in a movie where they're trying to fill with a lot of cameos.
Yep.
And I think I even read, though, that they got a little peeved because I think Roseanne thought she was going to be sort of in and out in like 2 hours, and they kept her there for a whole day.
Anyone who knows anything about film sets know you're never there for 2 hours.
Exactly.
There's no such thing as 2 hours on a film
this
set.
Out in 2 hours.
Nothing has ever happened in 2 hours on a film set.
Something breaks. Right here, really quick. Another cut scene, or I should say audio, where right there they're standing looking at the drawing saying nothing. Originally there's dialogue where John Doe says, "I know who this is. This is Freddy Krueger. He's the one I'm afraid of." He kind of pieces it together there. But I guess, they didn't want to name him quite yet.
I wanted to say, if a moment ago you saw that chalk drawing of Freddy Krueger on the ground.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about.
Yeah, last episode, if you remember, I mentioned that there was if I ever was to get a Nightmare on Elm Street tattoo of any kind, it would be something that would be a perfect one.
That'd be cool.
Like, I always like the idea of getting something that looks like it was drawn by a child. I even thought of having my little 7-year-old niece draw Freddy, and then getting that, but just because I think it would be cool. But that would be a neat one.
Again, I don't want to always sound like I'm trashing, but an example of how I feel like they get the David Lynch thing wrong is in a lot of the making ofs, interviews, and things about this movie from back in the day to now, this scene is always brought up as an example that they show of how weird and David Lynchian they were getting.
And plus, this sequence probably cost $5 to produce.
But I don't get it at all. David Lynchian was surreal.
Yeah, no, that is no way David Lynch
like reality changing, like a paper, never-ending paper type of thing, and that does not feel David Lynchian to me at all.
Ironically,
and that's why I feel like they just think weird was going to get them a Twin Peaks feeling, but it's not.
Ironically, for a film series that literally is based in the dream reality and dream world, what they don't understand is one thing that David Lynch does better than anyone else, because it's just so innate and natural to him, is David Lynch creates this dreamlike quality in his films.
Yeah.
And he creates these dreamlike images and sequences, David Lynch, that you recognize in this uncanny way, simply because it actually feels like a dream.
This
In the Nightmare franchise, some of the stuff they depict as quote-unquote dreams doesn't actually feel anything like a dream feels in reality. It just feels like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. This scene, I feel like, is the closest they get to a Twin Peaks sort of feel. The sort of out of it teacher. You know, and if you really look at the events that are on that wall before they pull the thing down, there's some weird stuff up there that you're like, what are they trying to, you know, there's this thing about Hiroshima, and it says like failed after it, and you're like, what are they, right there, seeing Nagasaki and Hiroshima attempts fail. But are they, is this also supposed to be tied to Freddy? Like,
oh my God, wait a minute.
He tried to do that, and he
No.
I don't know.
I think what it's suggesting, that's the hint to the audience that would tell you that we're not in reality. We are in Freddy's reality, potentially. Because the historical events are not what they are in real life. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's just a subtle hint, or maybe a subtle tell, that there's, and again, there's...
Yeah,
an obtuseness to the tone of this sequence.
I don't know. I wonder if there was thought behind it, or if they just went for weird.
It's a fascinating detail, I have to say.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating detail. Nagasaki and Hiroshima attempts fail.
But they're, you know, implying with all these dates above there that Freddy was doing things in like the 1800s.
Yeah,
So,
which makes no sense canonically.
Right, exactly. So I don't know if you're supposed to read that into what's on that board, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or if it's just weirdness, but it is weird either way.
Well, going back to the effect of the ever-expanding map in the back of the truck, I will say again, because it just bears repeating, the interesting thing about that little moment of the film is that's making a scene in a major movie that literally probably costs $10 to produce. Simply, all you have to do is buy or print all those maps.
I also have to point out, continuity-wise, that the Springwood High School in this movie looks nothing like it did in those scenes when, like, Alice was graduating.
Well, I don't think it's anywhere near as egregious in terms of something like that as the absolute horrifying treatment of the Myers house, for example, throughout the Halloween films.
Of course not. Of course not.
You know, where instead of considering the Myers house for what it is, which is a character, an important character, a lot of the films just are willy-nilly, and it's the same here.
So this is interesting, right? So this goes back to the house thing, right? It's like a trick, right? They walk into a house that appears to be, you know, just some other house in Springwood. But after they go in and the facade falls off, it's revealed that it is, I don't know, Nancy/Freddy's house, you know,
I'm
however
so
you want to
stuck
think about
in my
it.
mind on that Freddy theory. That's the thing.
This is what's weird to me right here. So they're awake, but this is happening. So I really don't understand.
Well, in the previous films, a lot of times you would have to see the character you're following the perspective of, or a character connected to that character somehow sleeping or falling asleep, to get some sort of understanding of where you are in the differing realities of this franchise.
Right.
And I think in Nightmare 6, in Freddy's Dead, I have this sense that due to the tone they're attempting, Rachel Talalay, Michael DeLuca, and the rest, due to this wild kind of offbeat tone, they've kind of dispensed with some of the rules, again, which some of the lesser sequels make the mistake of, in order to just let you drift through this questionable reality of whether you're in Freddy's dream world or reality or what any of that even means anymore after 6 Nightmare films.
Right.
So all I'm suggesting is perhaps they just said, let's not get bogged down anymore with all that, and let's just push them through the funhouse. Push them through the carnival spook house, the carnival haunted house, and make Freddy's Dead, like you were saying actually earlier, more of a ride even than a movie.
Well, this was like the family-friendly Nightmare out of all of them.
Oh, well, I have not seen one thing in this film that's even questionably violent.
You ready for this one? Are you aware of this fact? This is the only Nightmare film where Freddy does not kill anybody with his glove. Think about that.
Now, I need literally to take 5 full seconds of silence to digest that.
All right. Well, it's good because we're with the deaf guy, too. I'm sorry,
You
I had to make
interrupted
the
my
joke.
goddamn silence.
Sorry.
Ready? And... Wow.
Yeah, no glove. In fact, Freddy's the only one who gets stabbed with the glove. He gets at the end, you know?
Do you think when they were writing the script, they purposefully created that idea that they weren't going to use the glove? Or did it just happen that way?
I think they might have put thought into it just to try and make sort of the fact that he gets sort of killed by his own glove, even though it's, I guess, maybe the pipe bomb, but he gets stabbed by it to a little more effective if it's only him. I don't know. Or when he finally does get stabbed by it. But it's also the same kill count as the last movie, which was only 3 people.
I want you to imagine something I was thinking about.
Yeah.
Imagine this scene right here if Roseanne appeared in this scene too, playing this part.
Yeah.
So Roseanne beating this guy up, shaking that Q-tip at him, right?
It might have been a little too extreme for someone who was doing a normal show as like a mom. They probably didn't want her to be seen as this abusive mom, you know what I mean? Because of her show. But yeah, it would have been more effective, sure.
I want to say I have a real love-hate relationship with Q-tips. I love the feeling of putting the Q-tip in the ear, but everybody in the world knows the horrifying feeling of something getting shoved into your ear, the fear of that.
Yeah.
So seeing something, I actually just squirmed.
So this is, you know, Freddy, we're finally seeing him again since like the beginning of the movie. And I do think that Robert Englund is, you know, his comedy is sort of brilliant during the scene. If you know, barring the fact that maybe I don't want there to be this much comedy, but if there is, the way he is playing up the fact that Carlos can't hear him and he's jumping around behind him and making faces and, you know, doing all these funny things, it's great. I think it really shows some of his acting chops. But it's such a
there was never
quirky way of doing Freddy.
I don't think was ever a
this stuff.
And you see the way as he entered the shot, he looks at the audience? Mm-hmm. Did you see that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He does a few times in this movie, actually.
Like, this is great.
It is. It's funny. You know, if you're going to do funny, it's funny. But,
and it's also funny and interesting when you juxtapose other nightmare films where these exact events have played out in the exact same location, where they were depicted far more frightening and nerve-wracking. And in this one, it's just really for laughs.
When you, I did this thing yesterday, right? Because I was really curious about the idea of the Freddy in the first one.
That's like Kincaid, by the way, in the beginning of 4.
Freddy in the first one versus this one. I watched the scene, 2 scenes on the screen at the same time. It was the scene in the first one where you see Freddy holding the glove up and go like, "This is God."
Yeah, right.
And then at the same time, I'm watching Freddy in this one deliver one of his one-liners. And, I mean, it is so extreme when you look at how dark the Freddy originally started out was in Wes's movie, you know?
Yeah.
It really...
Yeah. That's why, we've said before in these Haddonfield radio episodes, part of the reason why we wanted to do Nightmare on Elm Street as a franchise for Season 2 is because of the unbelievable evolution of the franchise from Nightmare 1 to even right here. The amount of different artistic interpretations of the material and of Freddy as a character, with Robert Englund always anchoring it at its center, is just fascinating in this franchise.
By the time they get to this movie...
And this is great. The pin drop is a great idea.
Very cartoony with the sound, too, you know?
Yeah, oh, it's totally it's like total cartoony.
And, yeah, again, like the Robert Englund and the face he makes here before he's going to do them all... It's so...
Oh, this is amazing.
You know...
Also that they've taken music and all those like emotional cues out just because they are anticipating the audience laughing.
They're also getting you ready, I think, for like the 3D thing. All these things falling at the camera.
Yeah, oh, I didn't even think about that, but you're absolutely right.
But
it was just a mind F, by the way, dropping. It didn't actually do anything to him. It was just a mind F.
No. But you know, when they did the sort of the marketing with this movie, this is
pulling the chalkboard open wider. Well, it's just great visual humor and visual imagination.
But you got to listen to the sounds Freddy is making during this scene that are hilarious. And during the work print, right? If you go look online, you find the work print. during the scene, there's nothing else but Robert Englund's overdubs. They hadn't added any other audio yet, and it makes it even funnier hearing all those little right? And it's so...
I think this is the best scene in the whole film. I really do. I think the effects work. Now, let's mention real quick, I think it's very important. The effects in this film, we have a returning special effects pioneer, one of my all-time favorite effects artists, John Carl Buechler. But a lot of the practical effects were, I think, by DreamQuest Images, I think was the name of the company. But that sequence there, from the practical effects to the humor, they even allowed that scene to go on a long time, if you notice, because I'm sure they saw in the edit that it was working. But all of that is done, I think, to the best it can be done within the spectrum of Nightmare 6.
Yes. But what I was saying with Freddy, when they were doing the marketing and they were doing the funeral and they were sort of doing this big like send off for him, they actually got a lot of crap for this idea of sort of like endearing a child murderer. You know what I mean?
Of course. I mean, that is...
And even, like, when the city made it Freddy Krueger Day, like, all that stuff...
It was protested.
Yeah, it was, like, started, you know...
When L.A. Mayor, I think his name was Tom Bradley, when he named September 12th, 1991, Freddy Krueger Day, which essentially was just a promotional stunt for the movie.
To help the movie, yeah.
But it was protested, and it received a lot of hate mail for that mayor because they were vaulting a child murdering horror character.
And just having that public funeral where it's like all these people are weeping over the idea that this guy was killed.
But you got to understand what those people were actually celebrating by Freddy Krueger Day and by that mock funeral wasn't the character Freddy Krueger per se, but in terms of a Hollywood community sense, it was the fact that the franchise was a big financial success that brought a lot of asses into movie seats and made a lot of money for a lot of people in the Hollywood community.
Right.
And that's what those events were actually celebrating.
I think it's just odd how the public was, you know, so okay up until this with, like, buying your kids Freddy pajamas and dolls and selling lots of tickets and giving them money, you know, for you to see these movies and loving Freddy as this crazy pop culture icon, you know, but then all of a sudden when you want to celebrate and mourn his death as a sort of loved character, they were like, whoa, we shouldn't do that. But it's like, it's
only just a small,
it is in a
mildly vocal minority of people who just like protesting things.
And when that's happened, Robert Englund had a good quote. He said, we have to separate crime reality from movie escapism. You know what I mean?
I think that is perfectly and brilliantly put.
And that's obviously the you know, what certain people can't do, and those are the ones that
well, you have to also remember, in a cultural sense, there was something that was starting to kick up around this period of history, and I don't have on me right now the exact dates of when this occurred, so it might have been a little before Freddy's Dead or a little bit after. But in the American culture, people like Tipper Gore, Al Gore's partner, Tipper Gore, she had kind of collected a bunch of people to start to go after violent movies, violent media, violent video games, and starting to rile people up to this notion that this type of material promotes violent or you know, degenerate behavior, which obviously Joe and I can speak for you, I bet, both think that's nonsense.
No. Yeah.
But at that time in American culture, the late 80s, early 90s, this type of stuff was really a big, kind of a hot button topic. And I would argue the funny thing is, like you were saying before, Freddy's Dead is probably the gentlest Freddy movie.
Oh, well, yeah, exactly. And here's our one of our biggest cameos. Obviously, a little tie into the original film with
Oprah Noodle. What is it? Oprah. I can't get it in my mind. Oprah Noodle Mantra.
Yeah.
That's such a Johnny Depp name.
It is.
I love Johnny Depp.
And I love this sort of almost this idea that in the dream world, Freddy still sort of has like that kid, that guy, you know, Glenn from the first movie. It's still a soul that he can manipulate. And of course, here we have Inagata Devita, which is like one of the only songs that was not on the soundtrack that was put out. But look at, I do love this imagery of Freddy.
Again, I think
with
this is a really well done little moment. I love this.
It is.
And getting the licensing for In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida by Iron Butterfly is perfect.
It's almost like these movies at this point were being, they were. It wasn't the makeup and the gore anymore or anything like that. It was just effects.
I also love
to exaggerate the dream worlds.
I also love the innocence of the period that smoking weed will make you hallucinate and make you a tripped out, and give you this tripped out Iron Butterfly experience. I think is very adorable, actually. I want to say Lisa Zane is very dishy in this movie.
She is cute.
What I love, it's a very subtle thing, but I love her hair.
Yeah.
And she has a strand here and there of like silver in her hair, which number one I think is really attractive, and number two, it reminds me a bit, of course, of Heather Langenkamp, who when she had that gray through her hair, the character of Nancy. I don't think it's on purpose, but it's just I like this little moment. Obviously commenting on. Okay, real quick.
This is a
good moment where you get to really look at the Freddy makeup, which was basically a mask. Look at how easy Freddy's mouth, Robert Englund's mouth moves within the mask.
See, it's weird. I think I have a problem with his mouth in this one. Obviously, the makeup is a little lackluster.
I don't think it's great.
But to me, in particular, his top lip always sticks out to me. It looks different, almost like there's more makeup.
Well, I can see the actual stipple brush makeup line between the latex appliance and the makeup. I can see where the line is. But you can see how it probably made things a lot easier for Robert Englund to emote.
Yeah, I have to assume that their reasoning behind doing it this way was to make it a little easier after, this is the 6th film, so that he can get in and out of this stuff a little easier. It might also be I'm not sure if it was a money thing where, in the early films where they're applying like 7, 8, 9 different latex pieces to his head, every single day that he had to do that, those pieces had to be remade. They're not reusable. So maybe at this point, them using some sort of a reusable mask type of a thing, I don't know, maybe save them some money too, but I don't dig the makeup in this one. As much as I love Carl Buechler,
The corner cutting, if you're going to cut corners, and let's be honest, when you make a film for as little amount of money that this film had to work with to make this level of production design, I think if you're going to cut corners, it shouldn't be anything related to Freddy's look. I think that's
like
where
the Michael mask.
The money should have always be put into making sure Freddy, by against all else, that Freddy looks as good as possible. Don't you agree?
I do. I even think this makeup would have looked a little better if they could have made him a little slimier, shinier. It looks a little too latex.
I mean, these sequences,
just get something on there, but
they're very creative.
Hey, there's a making of from back in the day of this movie that shows this whole video game thing being made, and it is fascinating to see the 5 different rigs that they made.
Well, you can see it's all done with practical mechanical effects.
There's all these tricks where they use the angles so you don't realize, you can't see the big arm that's actually attached to the actor, or that he's standing on a spinning plate. And I have a problem with this, the idea that you just knock somebody out and they end up in Freddy's world. Isn't it different than dreaming?
Well, we talked about this, and we definitely both agreed that unconsciousness is not the same as sleeping.
Yeah.
When your consciousness is disconnected, you aren't in a dream. You only can dream due to the fact that you're still engaging with your consciousness. It's just a subconsciousness.
Yeah.
So
they just need to figure out how to get these two characters in, and I know, but find both of their ways cheesy.
One of the few hard and fast rules that should be followed throughout the films, that should be one of them.
Yep.
I think sleep, you have to be asleep in order to dream, not unconscious.
Yeah.
I also was noticing how much Freddy throws characters around in this movie, through walls. Yeah. Freddy continuously throws characters through walls.
Now, this whole thing with the power glove is great. It's sort of a great example of how Bob Shea doesn't give a crap what anyone tells him. They wanted to do this whole power glove bit that Nintendo had at the time, if people don't know.
Oh, it was a huge phenomenon.
Early days of Nintendo, there was this thing called the power glove. And it didn't really work well, but it was fun and it looked really cool. So they wanted to play off of that idea, and Nintendo told them no. And Bob Shea said, I don't care, let's do it anyway. And they did it, and of course it becomes one of the great scenes in the movie, and Nintendo left them alone.
And what I really like about it, I have to say a positive thing, is that I like that they made the Power Glove look as though Freddy would have made it, or the way Freddy would have made it.
It's an extension of Freddy's glove, if you look at it, of the claw glove.
And for Freddy fans, I'm surprised there isn't a recreation that I've ever seen of the Freddy Power Glove.
I bet somebody's done it.
Somebody must have done that, Freddy's Power Glove.
There's so many cosplayers
redesigned it, because that would be a great cosplay element for Freddy. And it's funny, it brings me to this point that even the films that aren't everyone's favorite films, there are always these elements that still seep into the iconography of the culture of the films.
You have to have a boiler room type setting. That's, you have to have the little girls, with the tricycle or jumping rope singing the song. You have to see the Elm Street house, Nancy's house. There's all these things you kind of do have to have, that in these Elm Street movies, no matter where you're going with it. I mean, let's face it, that one of the main themes in this movie is that there's an Elm Street in every town. That's one of Freddy's big lines, and what they're trying to kind of do with it. But yet, even though they're trying to take you out of Springwood and Elm Street, they keep all that iconography that we know
absolutely
that they have to have. They don't let go of it totally.
Yep.
And this is great. I love this. Is a sort of perfect the dream within a dream within a dream type of
which I love. It was either Nightmare 5 or 4 that had one of those great dream within a dream.
But they have a little fun with it in this one. I like how he gets back in the bed in a minute. It's like, there's nothing that's going to get me off this bed. And then the whole thing catches on fire. And you're like, oh, geez, But it's, again, back to them having fun with all this and just playing around and...
Another positive about this film that I would bring in that is occurring to me as I'm watching this right now, I don't feel as much drag and filler as I felt in Nightmare 5.
Well, the thing that this one does...
I feel like this movie moves a little bit at a better pace.
Well, this one keeps the mystery. There's this... You're trying to figure out who he is. Is he right about thinking he's Freddy's kid? That does kind of keep you motivated in the story, Because obviously by this point, too, you're also kind of catching the connection with Maggie. And you're trying to be like, where is this all going? You know what I mean? So I do think that it has that going for it to help keep you in it, regardless of the fact that there's not a lot of horror and kills and even Freddy for a long time,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
Because I think it's so fascinating that they actually do kill this character off.
Yeah.
I mean, and then there's this whole...
And maybe that's indicative of the fact that they really were seeing this. They weren't seeing a continuation, in other words, for this character.
Yeah, no, I know. But it's like, I don't know. It's sort of a big part of this. He's named John Doe. Let's give him a little something by the end of it. At least give him a name, or I don't know. Isn't it crazy, though, how in the real world he just got sucked up through the roof to them?
Wait, say that again?
So, in the dream, he's in the sky falling. And they just witnessed him go crashing through their van roof up into the sky.
Totally bizarre.
There's a great gaffe here when Freddy's falling. You can totally see the cable that is taking him down right there.
Oh, jeez, God, wow. You know what I think? I bet they said to themselves, people will assume it's part of the mechanism of the parachute.
No, I know.
That's probably what they thought.
And maybe it was, and it lined up wrong, but whatever.
But yeah, so it's not an offensive gaffe.
And this is, where he's finally sort of answering him and telling him, no, you've got this wrong, and I've used you.
Yep.
You've gotten me to my new sort of place where I can hurt people.
Yep.
And which is,
Take me to a whole new
place. So the whole thing is that he's bringing Freddy to his daughter, and the daughter, being him connected to the daughter, is how he's going to continue to get out of Springwood and haunt people, especially the fact that she's a psychiatrist who's helping kids. And here's the classic Looney Tunes moment, and that look on him, it's great. It is great, but it's I mean, it's just so different from the Wes Craven Nightmare on Elm Street, you know?
Well, I think we are so far removed, even though, of course, Wes Craven came and went, certainly came back for the third film and co-wrote the screenplay.
Yeah.
But yeah, this would not be the way Wes Craven certainly would have made the sixth Nightmare film. And we know that because we see what Wes Craven did with the seventh.
Sure. Yeah. No, it would have never gone here. It would have got really weird.
And you know what? This film, I spent some time going through a lot of the vintage reviews of this film and even some reviews of the internet age of this film. And I was surprised by a lot of people gave it a mildly positive reaction. I've got one here by Horror Press, a quick little piece. Horror Press says, the juxtaposition between straight-face horror and silly, campy comedy perfectly captures the film's essence. Freddy's Dead has all the elements of a horror movie. As a character suffers from nightmares aided by a woman trying to help him remember his true identity, we are treated to deaths that make you wince. And it says, can you seriously forget about the kid who got a Q-tip jammed straight through his ear? A creepy little girl, a mystery, flashbacks, but at the end of the day, this is still a Freddy movie. It would be sinful to deliver a Freddy movie that doesn't make us laugh. I have to say, I do kind of agree with that to a degree. Yeah, I think their laughs go all the way back to the beginning. Freddy has been, since at least the second movie, partially...
I don't know if he's even funny in the
character.
Second one. You know, think about him talking to Jesse.
I guess you're right.
Well, we've got work to do.
You know what? The quips really start in the third film.
It is. So I think it's once he became more funny with like part 3 and all, that's when he became more well-known and popular amongst the masses, right? You know, and even all the younger people and kids and even. So... You know, I think there's that generation that sort of just expect the laughs, but they did not fall in love with the Freddy from the first one, probably. You know what I mean? So, I don't know.
And it's funny, I'm looking at a Washington Post review from 1991, one little line here. And you're going out with a touch of class, a slam-bang finale in 3D, make that Freddy vision, a gaggle of one-liners directed at the final crop of victims and a few in-jokes, some wonderfully bizarre dream sequences, and the possibility that while Freddy may be gone, some of his progeny may live on, we can say no more. So some people, even some major critics, actually appreciated this film's tone. Mm-hmm. Again, I'm just not one of those people. Mm-hmm. Now, I find the film entertaining. I've even enjoyed watching it a couple times, researching this and watching it in pieces and then watching it now to do the fan commentary. I just think ultimately it does fall at the bottom of my rankings. Not the very bottom. I'm going to still keep Nightmare 5 at my very bottom, but I would put this just a little above Nightmare 5.
Yeah, I mean, critically, yes. I probably enjoy it more than it shows by where it sits on my list, but...
Where would it sit on your list,
about roughly? The same place.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. But one of the bright spots right here is this actor right here, Yaphet
Kotto, of course.
And everyone probably recognizes him from Alien, you know, and he did a lot of stuff back in the 70s and 80s. He was in a bunch of things.
Great character actor from a great period of Hollywood history, and
he
certainly
just adds that gravitas to some scenes.
Him and Harry Dean Stanton, their chemistry in Alien is, I don't even need to say anymore. It's just, he's a great actor, and in an couple iconic films, so it's nice to see him here. And I like his presence in this film as sort of like a grounding presence.
He's like the Obi-Wan Kenobi here.
Right.
He's giving them some information they need. He's
coaching
them and guiding them.
He just Yaphet Kotto not only has a really cool name,
of course,
but his energy, you just kind of you vibe with him and trust him, and so he's kind of a nice anchoring point as a character in this film's kind of lunacy.
There was a big cut scene with him in this character Tracy, even more than what we're seeing here, where he's training her and trying to teach her sort of a little bit more of how to be in control, so that she can be in more control in her dreams.
Right.
But again, there's probably a cut for time type of thing. Because it was good scenes. Some of the cut scenes, when you watch the work print, it's very obvious why they cut it. They're just awful. And then some, you can tell, right? Geez, there seems to be score and everything else on it. So, you know, they probably cut it for time because it is well done.
So, I'm having like partial like an amnesia here. Explain to me again, in a simple way, how is she Freddy's daughter again? Like
how is Maggie right here? She's literally Freddy's daughter. We see her in the flashback that we're saying that they're kind of saying that while Freddy was secretly behind his wife's back, creating that room in the basement and gloves and starting his murderous ways. You know, he was married. He had his daughter.
All right. Yep, I gotcha.
The wife stumbles upon his secret, and he gets mad and kills her. The kid witnesses it, and then once he's caught, they take his daughter away from him. You know, and he was put on trial for, you know, and then he's burned.
Now I'm back on the right page.
Right, and she's adopted after that.
I sort of get lost sometimes in these movies.
I know, yeah. And so, you know, that's how he's figured out how to get out of Springwood because it's his blood, you know.
Yeah.
And he used John Doe to get himself to her, and now he resides in her. He had to get all these kids' souls to be strong enough to get himself to sort of leap into his daughter here, and now he can go where she is. Or I don't know if his idea is to turn her into him.
And you know what it is? It's kind of cool because it is one element of this film that really kind of leans into the classic Freddy mythology. You know what I'm saying? And this is all really cool. And anytime you get a little bit of Robert Englund, you know what I mean?
This is the most screen time you see of him without the makeup in any of the films.
It was always, I think, a great thing to do for Robert Englund in these series because he's so important to the success of the Nightmare franchise. You can't even begin to... I could do a whole episode just talking about why Robert Englund is so important, obviously, to the success of this franchise. So a nice gift to him, movie to movie here and there. And if you remember in Part 5, one of the best scenes was his scene unmasked, and certainly in this as well.
Now, this is even though it kind of changes continuity from what we've learned about, I guess...
Did you see the thing that looked like Freddy's glove we just went past?
But and then she... When we see in his room that he has all these other versions of his glove... They're great. I mean, there's all these like ones with spikes, ones with razors. See them all there?
Well, because it's his workshop. It's so cool. Look at that.
Right?
Oh, look at
those.
And you know, Insidious, I believe, Insidious used one of those.
Really?
The one with the claws.
There's a quick shot. There's one with these literally razor blades just welded onto the ends of the fingers.
It just occurred to me. And I could be wrong, but I believe it was the movie Insidious that the red-faced demon, I believe they used that Freddy's alternate glove, the one that looks like a claw. And also, you know what's great about that? I could be wrong about that, guys. I got a lot of facts and details floating around in my 50-year-old brain. But the other thing is that claw could also be an homage all the way back to the development of Nightmare 1, where Wes Craven wanted Freddy to wear a claw glove to harken back to the primal fear of the animal's claw in our far distant past, being fearful of being killed by a tiger.
And did you notice there too in the drawing that he holds up that's supposed to be done by her as a kid with like mom and dad, that the house was Nancy's house.
And also, I like that she's now in the pigtails.
Yeah, she's put it all together. He was here waiting for her.
I also think it's just very adorable. Good Lord.
It is a great shot, that pan all the way up Freddy as he's just standing there with that classic gunslinger, you know, low shoulder pose.
Well, you know, I have to say, and I know everyone at home listening is really has been waiting for my point to be made here, but I think my crushiness for Lisa Zane may have now eclipsed even my crush on Patricia Arquette.
Well,
I think it was the pigtails that did it. That just put it right over the edge for me.
You know, we kind of went by it, but I did want to bring up, if you looked at that scene earlier when Freddy was dragging his claws across the chalkboard.
Right.
There's a weird gaff where if you look at the tips of all the knives.
With the deaf victim?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can see the like soft stuff they put in the tips of all the blades.
Oh, I saw it.
Yeah.
It looks like almost like a little piece
Like
of
hot
glue or hot
something.
glue.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, would that to have been not so you didn't have scratches on the board on repeated takes, or
I
that were they afraid it
guess.
was going to damage the
Hey, there's that
blade?
name again. Is that what you were talking about?
Sepultura.
Yeah, it's up there. It's on that wall too.
Look, it has to be the band. My only guess is that Sepultura
Probably, yeah.
existed in the early 90s. Look, the one aspect of media I don't have a lot of knowledge about is actually popular music. And strangely, because Joe and I did bands for so many years, you'd think I would know more about popular music, but I just don't know enough about it.
You know a lot about music, just not pop music. You know
Just
more
not
of the
pop
obscure
music.
stuff.
Like,
which
I
is-
can't tell you when Sepultura's origins were, but I know they were a band.
And this is some pretty heavy stuff. This whole scene.
This
you know
is
what I
very
mean?
heavy, yeah.
That's what I mean. Like this movie.
But the Nightmare franchise can bear that weight because
Oh, they've always
subtext
tackled
has
stuff, yeah.
they've always tackled this stuff.
Yep.
Yep, that's exactly it.
And then of course though when she finally beats him, it does go for this little bit over the top type of makeup where it's almost like his face was made out of clay and it just sort of misshapens instead of it
Right,
being
right.
like what an actual human head would do if it was beaten like
Right.
that. So again, I feel like even within their darker moments in this movie, they never let it go truly like most horror movies would have. You know, it never.
Doesn't it also occur to you? It certainly does to me that Freddy would really enjoy this particular kill.
Of course.
Because this harkens
Well, he
back
doesn't
to
kill her.
Freddy. But you know what I mean?
I know.
The
Yes,
torture,
yes.
psychological torture, ties back to Fred Krueger's own past as a child molester and a murderer.
Yep.
So he'd be getting something out of that.
And one of the
even this he'd probably be getting something out of.
One of the criticisms I have read, sometimes people say like too many people live at the end of this one, including her, and both doctors, and you know.
I love that effect. That's got to be John Carl Buechler.
It is, yeah.
I think it's really effective and really creative.
Yeah, he did. I mean, he did most of the stuff in this movie.
That's a great transition there too. Did you notice
Yeah,
that?
yeah, they do a lot of
Beautiful
that.
transition.
Yeah, yeah.
How do you think something like that? Because it looked like just one shot. How do you think that was
it
done?
was just a swap out of
Yeah.
characters, you
Wow.
know, as the camera transitioned. You
really
know?
cool.
Yeah.
The Nightmare franchise, one thing you can't take away from it over the course of the films, whether some are better than others, they always have great production value, great production design. I always like the energy they put into these sequences and the different ideas, and even though, like I was saying earlier, none of them really ever really feel like real dreams or nightmares, they're not obtuse enough, but in the Freddy reality it works. That was awesome. That's an awesome little thing.
And to get kind of real here for a minute, this scene in particular changed this actress's like whole life. She was filming it and found it kind of easy to sort of get into this character.
Oh, no.
And feel the pain. And it was after they filmed it that she started remembering actually being molested.
That can't be real.
Nope, it is. And
this actor? This happened to this
actress,
actor?
yep.
Oh, my God.
To Leslie Dean. If you watch the documentary, Never Sleep Again, she talks all about it. She tells the sort of story. So
in case you don't know what that is, there's an amazing, all-encompassing Nightmare on Elm Street franchise documentary that if you haven't seen it, you need to go watch it, called Never Sleep Again. I have a strong feeling that 99.999% of all the people listening to this right now are like, next.
Yeah.
But we can all agree it's one of the greatest horror documentaries ever made.
Yeah, it's a good one. It goes through every film in a great way.
Well, that is a very really disturbing revelation that you just brought up about Leslie Dean.
Yeah, no, yeah, it
must have triggered it.
It literally changed like her whole life, you know, and so it's interesting, right?
That actually is very interesting. And you notice on the front of that locker it had a sticker, and it said "Claws for Life."
And it's interesting how this character, the Doc character, he goes into dreams his own way. You know, he's got this whole other control,
which sort of reminds me of Nightmare 3.
Yeah, and it was, and then a minute ago when the girl Tracy, when she's burning her arms on the stove, reminds me of how Nancy figures out how to get out of the dreams too by hurting herself, you know, or a burn on the pipe. She puts her arm on there, you know. But it's interesting that he doesn't. You know, like why isn't he actually killing him?
You know, Robert Englund, I really noticed this past watching this. He really gets probably maybe the most dialogue in this film than any of the films. Do you think? Mm-hmm. I mean, I've noticed he has a lot of, and I think maybe it's connected to the fact that the makeup became much easier to perform through and emote through, so they're able to give him more and more, possibly. I don't know if that's true, but he's got a lot. That's actually very funny.
Well, and this all goes back to the first film when he's doing the same sort of thing.
Yeah, I like all these slight
callbacks.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And also, I like this strange assumption, or what's the word I'm looking for? Like thought that Freddy's sort of running out of new tricks. He's sort of repeating his greatest hits by now.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? In ways of terrorizing people.
Yeah. And he's explaining that because of the demons, that this doc understands that he's able to just keep coming back. That they gave him a job. He literally says, like, they gave me this job.
The demon snakes basically, essentially, respawn Freddy Krueger every time he dies. They respawn him as a harbinger of evil and as essentially a beneficiary of evil energy that these demonic snakes somehow also must symbiotically feed off of. So Freddy is a vehicle to them, and that's why they keep, like a video game, every time he dies, they respawn him. Mm-hmm. So it is an interesting notion, and it's funny that looking in parallel at the Friday the 13th franchise, there was the one that's called Jason Goes to Hell.
Yeah.
I think it's The Final Friday. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, the Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, and Friday the 13th franchises, as we all know, they all sort of bled into each other in terms of influence. But Freddy's Dead and Jason Goes to Hell have very similar conceits in the way they deal with the evolution of destroying these types of iconic characters, Freddy or Jason.
Yeah.
And Freddy appears, actually, at the very end of that movie, Jason Goes to Hell.
So that's one of my fun facts. With the beginning of this movie saying that this takes place 10 years from now, right?
Okay.
I'm actually, I took this right off of, I think, Wiki, because it was the best way to explain it. It messes with the timeline from all that stuff, because taking 10 years from now to refer to the conclusion of A Nightmare on Elm Street Dream Child would actually impact the placement of Jason Goes to Hell, 1993, since Freddy Krueger's claw emerges from the portal to hell at the end of that film to sees Jason's hockey mask. This indicates that the defeat of Freddy in this film preceded the events of Jason Goes to Hell. So it just like, if you think too much about the timeline of this movie, it's a little wacky.
This takes us right back to the beginning of the episode. Okay, and I'm going to tell you why. Remember I mentioned Elseworlds films or Elseworlds comics that don't take place in the main canonical timeline, okay? So you could almost take a reality where Freddy's dead, Jason Goes to Hell, and Freddy versus Jason exist almost in their own separate timeline.
Yeah, they're sort of arguing if you're trying to make it all fit a canon.
That's a way you could do
timeline.
it.
Also, this is right where you were supposed to put on your 3D glasses when you watch the movie. I mean, look at some of these shots. It's a little funny what they were doing with it.
Well, what they're doing here editorially is they're giving the movie theater audiences a few seconds to get the glasses on and reorient themselves to what's about to happen.
And that's where in the work print, you know, that you see her look at the camera and be like, now, and to put them on. So now this is the scene I was talking about. You imagine you're watching this in 3D. This was what reminds me of those early Disney park rides where all of a sudden you're going to be taken into this little, you know,
like you're going on the Haunted Mansion.
Exactly.
ride.
And right now, boom, look at this stuff.
But
right?
look at it, it's beautifully designed.
It is. And it's you know, it also reminds me of the beginning of, was it Tales from the Crypt was a little bit like this,
just like the opening credits with the slamming doors and
everything, right? Yeah.
And a lot of the special effects people on the Nightmare on Elm Street films actually worked on Tales from the Crypt.
And we should point out that these guys are CG, and this is some early use of CG that, you know, again, they were, you know, they were on the cutting edge of some stuff.
It looks positively homey,
it does.
Considering that Terminator 2 Judgment Day came out I think this 1 year later or 1 year before.
And there's a funny story.
And look at those computer effects.
Another fun fact was that while they were getting some of their 3D footage back from the developers,
to be converted and processed,
they actually were accidentally given a scene from Terminator 2.
Now, does that suggest that there was some thought of creating 3D sequences for Terminator 2? Because there is a Terminator 2 movie ride.
Right, exactly. I don't know.
That is in 3D.
No, I know this was just from the movie. I think it was just an accidental.
Okay.
You know, they got some of his footage, and you know, they're kind of freaking out about it. And I'm not sure if it's true, but that there might be like a split second of it that they actually edited in here somewhere.
I also like how the plating on the door is the same material that Freddy's glove is made out of. And also,
and you know, and so here's one of these cases, right? Is backstory too much? You know, it's like you demystify Freddy too much. We already know he's the son of 1,000 or 100 maniacs.
The bastard son of 100 maniacs.
And do we also have... So we know he doesn't have a great start, you know? We know he's going to grow up an orphan. So... I don't know. Is this all too much to show every...
I think the simple answer is yes, unequivocally. I think this depiction is just too obvious, too on the nose.
Isn't he creepier to know a guy just sort of snapped and made a glove of blades and killed kids and...
But I do like that. The one thing I do like, though, about it is it's not so much that the young Freddy is being depicted as evil because he's killing the animal. It's that Freddy's being depicted as evil because he's killing the animal for an audience.
Well, they're trying to get you to have some empathy for Freddy in these scenes.
And this actor that plays the I guess late teen, early 20s Freddy, very interesting.
He's supposed to be, I think, 16.
And Alice Cooper, of course, playing his abusive father.
Stepfather, you should point out, or adoptive father.
I really think this actor playing this young version of Fred Krueger is actually really cool.
Yeah.
And really cool looking.
Yeah.
And there's a psychosexual element to his stepfather taking him into the basement to whip him. It's sadomasochistic.
Yeah. And the police, sir, may have another Animal House reference, of course.
And that Freddy is actually getting off on the pain.
Oh, yeah.
So there is a sexual nature to this.
He's training himself to withstand the pain with the cuts.
And that he has the razor blade, which is the genesis of the glove. I actually love it. I think this is actually, while I think the childhood sequence, early childhood, might be a little on the nose, this part I think is very cool.
If only you could have got a cameo from John Saxon standing out there like throwing the bottle in or whatever.
Now I want to say
this dialogue is pretty cheesy. The way that them just sort of...
I mean, this is just as goofy as it gets, let's be honest. I mean, it's funny and fun. But when you see the dream snake demons in their stone monument form, by the way, if you look at that image again, tell me they don't look just like the Sleestacks from the old Sid and Marty Krofft Land of the Lost series.
Yeah,
they almost are identical.
Yeah.
And when I was a kid, I have to tell you, I used to love Land of the Lost. Grumpy the dinosaur and Dopey the little brontosaur.
I actually really
I was terrified by the Sleestacks.
I really enjoyed the movie with
Will Ferrell, Danny McBride.
Funny, you know.
I think it's better than people remember.
Yeah.
It's not a bad movie.
No,
the TV series, I just recently bought the original series and I've been watching it.
I mean,
I love it.
If you're somebody who's like a hardcore original series and you take it seriously, you might not like the movie, but the movie I liked. But I digress.
I do also think that I'm going to have to, maybe we'll put it in the pinned comment, that name of the young actor that played the teenage Freddy Krueger. Do you have it here?
Teenage Freddy Krueger, Toby Sexton.
Well, he really looks like he would turn into Robert Englund.
Right, yeah. He said he got together with Robert Englund to talk to him about the character, kind of learn about the voice, and figure out how he would say certain things and kind of hold his demeanor and all that sort of thing.
And just to get it out there, the name of the little boy playing Fred Krueger was Chase Schreimer and Toby Sexton.
So this is interesting, right? Their whole idea here that they have to bring Freddy into the real world to get him, which is kind of like right out of part one. It's essentially what they do in part one, right?
Yep.
But like, Why does it work here?
Well, look.
And it didn't in part 1?
And also, my other problem with it is it's essentially the same exact way we've killed Freddy.
Well, exactly.
A thousand other times.
That's my other thing. Is like really
the extending arms reminds you of Nightmare 1, though, doesn't it?
It does.
But still,
a lot of stuff does. But
this death, quote unquote, of the character of Freddy Krueger in the film isn't that different than the death, quote unquote, of Freddy Krueger from the other films.
It's just that it
doesn't feel any more climactic than it should.
They didn't know about the dream demons in the first one, but for whatever reason, killing him in the real world in this one actually makes the dream demons leave him, and that's that. I don't know why that. Well, I mean, we know why, writing-wise, there was no Dream Demons and Wes wasn't going to do any sequels. But, you know, if you want to look at this movie and what they're doing, you should say that should have applied to the first one.
No, you're absolutely right.
I think, you know.
No, I agree.
But, and
man, did I used to love Chinese stars.
Oh, God.
Remember, when I was a kid...
There were all these ninja magazines I used to get.
That's what I used to get, too. And you could order them from the back of the ninja magazines. Yeah. I think it's really interesting, and I wonder to this day if they still exist. I can't believe there was such a thing as ninja magazines.
I know.
Why was there ninja... And why were we buying ninja magazines?
They existed to sell kids Chinese stars,
and
apparently.
What would happen is
stars.
The image in the back of the magazine was the actual chrome-looking badass, and then you'd order it, and it was a foam one.
It was, of course. They can't go send kids these...
But it was a huge disappointment. I consider that Chinese star debacle from maybe when I was 12 or 13, one of the worst failures of my life that I remember, very stingingly, when I didn't get the real Chinese star in the mail.
One time I sent away in the back of a comic...
Get those bullies yet!
It was supposed to be a Captain America flying shield, and it was this thing you put on your wrist with a suction cup and a spring and a string. And
we all fell for the one with the, how about the Spidey web shooter?
Yeah, it was the same thing, but they put a Captain America sticker on it. You know,
and the Spidey web shooter I bought from the back of a magazine from Spider-Man ended up being basically, you know, the silly string container, just on the palm of your hand.
So this is interesting, too, right? So he's brought into the real world, and now he looks human, but in a second he's going to go right back to burned. Like, if he's in the real world, how is he still, you know, like changing, you know, being a changeling here and morphing into different things?
I don't know, but I will say I love how much of actual Robert Englund we get in this film. And I think this is one of actually his best performances as Freddy Krueger.
Oh, it is, definitely.
And it must probably irritate him that one of the films in the franchise that gets the least amount of love, which is Freddy's Dead, may very well have his best actual acting in it. Now, maybe it's not everyone's favorite incarnation or depiction of Freddy, but I would suggest it's some of Robert Englund's best acting.
I just truly don't understand what the heck. Why is he crawling on the walls? Is it because the demons are still in him? He still has some power?
I also wanted to say, it's in my notes, but that orange smiley face you've seen show up on the wall a couple times, I would almost guarantee you that is actually an homage to Joe Dante's The Howling.
Oh.
And I think that was the sticker that was used by Robert Picardo's serial killer character when he would appear somewhere. I could be wrong, but I'm almost positive I'm right.
There was another thing in the work print that was a little different. When Freddy finally blows up here and the demons pop out of him, in the actual movie here, they just sort of howl and run away. But in the work print, they had dialogue. And it was, I swear some of it is actually Robert Englund going like, what's going on here? And then one of the other voices is like, we got to get out of here. And then they run out. It's like really weird and cartoony. I'm glad they kind of got rid of that. But, you know, I don't know. This whole thing is just bizarre.
And then she bites his rubbery latex nose.
Yeah, I know.
That must have tasted great.
I don't know.
It's all that, like, epoxy all over it.
But, you know, it's...
This is a little drawn out here. This I almost equate to Laurie Strode trapping the shape with a refrigerator in Halloween Ends. That's the vibe I'm getting from this little moment of this film. And
you know, this is that point where like when they were filming, I suppose they didn't really clearly know how this was all going to go, and a lot of these effects and setups were kind of done on the fly.
And I think you can absolutely see that.
You can tell that hand didn't look probably half as cool as it could have if, you know, they'd really had some time with it.
You know, just because I always mean to bring it up, and I may have in one of these episodes, but just so I know I did. If you guys are real big Freddy fans, just like Joe and I are, and you want to kill a couple hours, there's a YouTuber that goes by Cosplay Chris. He's called Chris Stanley. And he does a number of incredible Freddy Krueger videos on his Cosplay Chris YouTube channel, where he gives you rankings of the masks and of the movies and the performances, and a lot of great behind-the-scenes videos about the night. He's like really a Nightmare on Elm Street expert.
A lot of great info about specifically the costumes and different masks,
the gloves,
and the different gloves. He's got a lot of good info
really,
on that
really,
stuff.
he makes his videos extremely detailed for hardcore fans. So if you want to get some real great Freddy Krueger opiate into your system, go check out Cosplay Chris.
And I also believe in the work print, there was a major difference that when they do blow him up, you don't see the Freddy heads that kind of keep coming out of the mouth.
Oh,
You know?
okay. Yep.
Yeah. And there's a slight difference in the very last scene when she's like, Freddy's dead and all that. They just sort of did the whole
And
ending
really,
differently.
all this tussling and fighting was really just for Freddy getting... continuing to manipulate to the very end. He's trying to get that glove on her hand.
Yep. He's hoping
and
even
get that
here...
family birthright to take effect.
But, you know, of course, even in this sort of big moment, they're finally killing Freddy and all that. They give him one last one-liner, you know?
Well, of course.
Kids.
Which you got to admit is funny, and it probably got a big laugh, especially in the movie theater.
Yeah.
I do believe Yaphet Kotto could rip a door off the wall.
Exactly.
Why it took him 2 hours to realize it?
Look at that.
I mean, yeah. This actually reminds me very much of the very end of another 3D film from the period, which is Jaws 3. When the Jaws 3 or Jaws 3D, the shark blows up, and all like the guts and the teeth and chunks of shark come floating right at the 3D audience. And that kind of reminds you got to have that in a 3D moment, in a 3D climax.
I also feel like this is sort of an anticlimactic ending.
Oh,
like she's just
highly.
like, Freddy's dead, and then we cut. You know, we're done. They give you the nice montage here of all the scenes from earlier movies, which, you know, you gotta do.
Knowing the hucksterism and the William Castleism of Robert Shea, I would say he must have thought in his mind, even though we're killing off Freddy, giving him a mock funeral, calling this movie the final nightmare, you know they were thinking, well, he'll probably be back.
I don't know. That's what I was just gonna say. I think seeing all this reinforces the idea that they did think they were probably done. Now, I do agree that I bet in the back of Robert Shea's head, he knew that if this makes money,
he knew he would be leaving money
dead.
on the table by not continuing. And he didn't leave much money on the table.
I really think it was a gamble for them. I really think that they weren't sure if this, because the last one didn't do so hot. Was Freddy so played out that it wasn't gonna continue to sell, and that's why they had to really push things like 3D, and that they were killing him off, and it was going to be the biggest, one yet, and all that stuff. Or they saved the best for last, and all that, But, so I think they were willing to go there if this sort of came out and bombed. But of course, in the back of Shea's head, he's saying, "I'm gonna, if this makes money." Of course, we're going to do another. I don't think
I'm sure
they must have thought how they were going to do it.
When they made like $14 million and opened at #1 their opening weekend, they must have immediately started thinking. Because it's interesting that whatever they started developing from that point on ultimately leads to Wes Craven, really, inarguably at the height of his directorial career in the mid-90s, to return to the franchise as a director and a writer, important to note, for the next film, of course, the 7th film, Wes Craven's New Nightmare.
I think that shows, though, how New Line didn't really have a clue how they were going to what to do to
Right.
get this back,
Right.
because they're like, we have to go to Wes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like what? And you know, thank
This
God.
montage, I have to say, this is a lot of fun. I'm actually
It is.
getting, I'm so
Yeah.
distracted watching it, I
I
can
know.
barely do this commentary.
Yeah, it's some great stuff.
A lot of
you
great
know?
stuff. I love this little greatest hits.
You know, and it's kind of weird. Like I was watching, they showed the scene in the beginning of the montage of Nancy with the phone and the tongue, and I feel like in a way, like that's an example of how Wes did something in his movie that came off creepy. That if it was done in part 3 or 4, would have been done very. It would have come off more campy.
Right.
Or
Yes.
it's the difference in how you could play something both ways. But you know, when there's no expectation of comedy, it becomes horror.
Yep,
you know.
you're absolutely right.
I don't
So there we are. Freddy's Dead. The
Rest in
final
peace.
nightmare. Rest in peace, Freddy Krueger. Oh, well, not for long. He won't be resting for long. The
And-
snake demon puppets were created by Jim Towler. Let's get
There
that
you
out
go.
there. Because it was very cool. The Dream Demon animation, Pacific Data Images. Very interesting. Actually, I'm watching these credits. A lot of practical effects houses.
Oh yeah, that whole house was.
A lot
was
of
models.
companies
Yep.
coming in to do a lot of these effects and working for very cheap because there was only $10 million to spend all in. So it's really amazing what they did achieve in terms of production value with that amount of money. It's pretty amazing.
And the song that came on right in the beginning of the credits.
Yeah, I was going to
there-
ask about that.
So that's Iggy Pop.
Oh, wow.
And it was written. You know, he made it for this
he
movie.
wrote it for an original song for the movie, Iggy Pop?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's always weird to me that when they have a big artist do a song for a movie and then it's only used at the end of the movie.
Well, not always because they...
No, not always,
yeah,
but sometimes. They're like this.
Right,
like sometimes
right.
they do that. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah.
But see, Why Was I Born? Freddy's Dead, performed by Iggy Pop.
Oh, wow.
And there's a
There you
lot
go.
of music by the Goo Goo Dolls in this movie as well. I noticed.
Pretty big soundtrack, deep bench soundtrack now that I'm looking at it.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
yeah,
you know,
so-
yeah, there we go. It's in a way
That was
the
a lot of
end
fun.
of the sort of the original timeline, I guess, in a
Or
way.
the original era.
Yeah.
This basically brought to a close the original continuing adventures of 80s and early 90s Freddy Krueger. Really 80s Freddy Krueger. 1991, that's where it ended. What comes next in Nightmare 7, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, like I was saying earlier, is theoretically not Freddy. And then you go on and it's the Jackie Earle Haley Freddy coming
But
and
thank
the
God
Freddy versus Jason Freddy.
Within New Nightmare, there are scenes where they do put England in the classic Freddy makeup when they're doing like him and or Heather on the talk show. And stuff.
right.
So
right.
you know you do get that taste of him in there, but obviously that's Robert Englund in that movie, not Freddy.
By the seventh film, in bringing back, I'm sure what I would guess in my own mind is that part of getting Wes Craven back in the director's chair probably was allowing Wes Craven to have carte blanche in terms of creativity.
Well, and then side note is that personally, Bob Shaye and Wes Craven, it's no secret that they, you know, up until sort of New Nightmare, they had sort of fallen out of, you know, favor with each other as the years went on, and both sort of, I think, under the idea that they both felt ownership sort of Nightmare, you know, and it was hard for them, I think, between the two of them to almost figure out who's the boss when they're both working together on it.
Right.
So I think of what happened right before New Nightmare, or in Bob's sort of, you know, I think he extended that olive branch when he knew we had to go to Wes to help get a new story to bring Freddy back, and the two of them, I think, resolved a lot of differences. I've heard Wes talk about this big sort of talk that they had. They sit down, and I think that even might be where Bob Shaye retroactively gets Wes in on money from some of these other movies,
previous
and
entries,
stuff
right?
that he felt he should have had,
which
and,
I
you
think
know,
is fair.
And so I think they kind of just were kind of friends again.
And, you know,
they decided that they had this great idea to renew it all.
Something that comes out of this entry for me that I still, you know, think I have so much respect for is Rachel Talalay. In terms of her position all through the, as a guiding hand in the Nightmare franchise, beyond as just a director of the 6th film. Well, and back in that period, there were all these amazingly talented female directors coming into horror. Rachel Talalay, Mary Lambert, Mary Harron, Catherine Bigelow. This rise of female-centric, female-fronted horror that I would definitely put Rachel Talalay really right up there in
one of the pioneers. So
certainly up there with like Deborah Hill as also as a producing pioneer.
Yep.
So just I'm a fan. That's all I'm trying to say.
And the criticisms, you know, I don't want it to take away from my overall opinion that I really, really respect Rachel Talalay and her career, and you know, I think because
it extends far beyond Freddy's Dead. And
something I've been a little hesitant to bring up because I didn't know for sure when I was trying to do some research, but I read. I think in 2 different places, small blurbs that during the filming of this movie, Rachel Talalay actually became sick. I don't know to what she had or to what degree, and that there's a solid chunk of this movie that she didn't direct.
Okay.
You know what I mean? And so I don't know the specifics, how much. That's why I didn't really want to talk about too much. So again, just taking certain facts, you know, into consideration, you know, this movie, probably isn't the strongest thing on her resume, but I really respect the person in the career.
And I like that it was her coming back to basically her family, her film family, the New Line Cinema team.
It was kind of like she was combiing her, you know, she had these two, the
exactly
John
right.
Waters and the New Line thing, and then this one, it was sort of a culmination of both. And you know what? Regardless of maybe how the movie came out, that was a reward for somebody who put in, you know, probably countless hours of their life into this franchise, and she deserved it, regardless of what you think of the movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree.
She deserved to be given that chance and be put in that position, and you know.
Well, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I mean, I love going through these Nightmare on Elm Street movies and Halloween movies and whatever comes next. I love doing these fan commentaries and these deep dives and doing the research. And I actually can't wait for the month of researching Wes Craven's New Nightmare.
Yeah.
Because when we return with Haddonfield Radio next, we'll be doing episode 10 of our series, Haddonfield Radio Trailer Park.
Yep.
And it's a very exciting episode that Joe and I are really pumped for. And we've both been doing a lot of research, and we're literally guaranteeing a great episode. We're going to be doing the trailers for one of the all-time horror classics, 1960s Psycho, and its very controversial 1998 Gus Van Sant shot-for-shot remake, also called Psycho. So that'll be up immediately next for Haddonfield Radio Trailer Park, episode 10, Psycho. And we will be back, amazingly enough, with episode 20.
Wow.
20 of Haddonfield Radio, otherwise known as Season 2, Episode 7, which will be Wes Craven's New Nightmare. And so something to look forward to.
Don't forget, for this episode and all of our main episodes on Haddonfield Radio, you can download these on Spotify.
Yes.
And listen, take us to go.
If you ever want to just pop in your earbuds when you're going out for a walk with the dog, or as the weather's improving, you're going out for a bike ride, or going out to just do anything where you can throw your earbuds in and you want to listen to Haddonfield Radio episodes as audio-only podcasts, well, just go over to Spotify and search Haddonfield Radio Podcast, and you can find audio-only podcast versions of every single episode of Haddonfield Radio. They usually premiere about 24 hours after they premiere on YouTube. So if it premieres on a Friday on YouTube, Saturday morning we'll have it up on Spotify as an audio-only podcast. Now, the reason why Joe and I mentioned that is because right now we are also developing a brand new Spotify exclusive series that we're going to be releasing more information about as time progresses. We're going to be doing specifically and exclusively for Spotify. So if you want to get that series when it premieres coming up fairly soon, you need to go over and find us on Spotify and hit that follow so we can keep you up to date of when our new series is going to premiere. The Haddonfield radio series, of course, is continuing on. Nothing changes. The YouTube channel will always be Haddonfield Radio. We're just going to be trying something new in parallel over on Spotify. And on top of that, like we just said, you can also get these Haddonfield Radio episodes there. So that's Spotify Haddonfield Radio Podcast. And we have an Instagram page. If you haven't visited us there, we have a very lively Instagram page, a lot of great comment threads. If you go to Instagram, just search hashtag Haddonfield Radio or Haddonfield_radio and you'll find us.
Yep, that's where you'll see ads when we do our occasional live streams and anything different out of the ordinary. That's where we
promote all this.
Our primary advertising goes there. So always follow the Instagram to check us out. But yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah, we really love you, and we really appreciate you guys joining us here to watch Rachel Talalay's 6th Nightmare on Elm Street sequel, Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. We'll be back next time with episode 20. I cannot believe we're already at episode 20. But we'll be back with Wes Craven's new Nightmare. We're cruising right through the Nightmare franchise.
It's happening,
We're cruising right through it. So, yeah, we'll be back with that and more Trailer Park and a lot of exciting things to come. So, we hope you're going to join us on the rest of this journey and continuing onward. And until then, we love you guys. Anything else?
Just remember, don't fall asleep.
And my name, as always, is Oprah Noodle Mantra.
I'm Joe Francazio.
And have a very happy Noodle Mantra.